Chapter 904. Luo Nan's answer strictly adhered to the military drill and maintenance regulations. He didn't cower, he didn't advance rashly. Anyone would like this kind of recruit subordinate. If he could successfully practice it, then it would be even more perfect. Liang Lu nodded his head in satisfaction. But in the next instant, his neck suddenly stiffened. Split? You're using split? Isn't it lighthouse? Luo Nan looked at him strangely. Lighthouse is a defensive skill. It won't solve the problem here. Of course I know, but I only taught you lighthouse. Who did you learn split from? The professional skills involved in the 120 rules of base maintenance are all taught through simulation. Among them, the vertical collar dynamo core only supports lighthouse and split. You taught me lighthouse yesterday, so I'm going to continue learning it today. Liang Lu's neck leaned back. He subconsciously wanted to change his angle to observe the recruit he had personally taught. His expression was rather subtle. But Luo Nan, lighthouse is a cohesive type. Split is a fabric type. The tricks to the two are completely different. Don't you think that when you learn it? Liang Lu's words were a bit difficult to continue. He just extended his hand and made a kneading and releasing motion. In reality, even he himself didn't know what he was gesturing with. Luo Nan thought for a bit and answered seriously, "My foundation in quiet cultivation isn't quite enough. Lighthouse is easy to learn but hard to master. Looking at the current overall effects, split is a bit better." Liang Lu opened his mouth, but he was actually unable to refute. He took a deep breath in the next second and forcefully pulled his thoughts back from the minutiae. He continued to carry out his responsibilities as a superior officer. Your processing methods are extremely accurate. Split is the only and most efficient processing technique at this stage. But you're a recruit after all. You lack actual combat experience. For the sake of safety, you still need to use lighthouse to protect yourself. You can also use this to guide reinforcements. Luo Nan listened very seriously and nodded his head. But Liang Lu was still worried that he would misunderstand. He immediately said, "I'm not saying that you're wrong. But let's think of a more difficult situation. If you're performing patrol work alone and you're faced with a situation, and no one is cooperating with you, you'll have to perform dual operations if you forcefully split. I've checked your medical report. It seems that the original brain structure does not support multitasking, so it's more difficult for you. You can ask Colonel Shang about this shortcoming later. He is from the School of Creation. He can teach you a few things about the skill of precise planning. Although I am also from the School of Creation, I am far from being able to teach in accordance with your aptitude. Speaking of which, if you're talented in segmentation, you should be able to learn this quite quickly." The School of Creation. Luo Nan muttered to himself. His train of thought was a bit erratic, and he subconsciously thought of Dean Wan. Then, he remembered that he had already learned the so-called precise coordination from Dean Wan. However, there was no way he could explain this to Liang Lu. It could be said that Liang Lu gave his all in teaching actual combat without holding anything back. He had already assessed the danger level of this matter. It belonged to the troublesome but relatively low level of danger, which was suitable for a rookie to handle. But then again, was segmentation considered elementary? Liang Lu shook his head, shaking off these meaningless distracting thoughts. He gave Luo Nan a task. "Since you said segmentation, then segmentation will be fine. I'll be the support. I'll use lighthouse for defense. You'll handle the matter of segmentation. You have confidence, right?" "I do." Luo Nan puffed out his chest as he answered. Then he gave a portion of the control authority over the levitating probe ball, which was already 30 meters away, to Liang Lu. But before this, the 4 probe balls all opened up with miniature cracks, causing the several hundred segmentation instruments hidden inside to pour down like seeds. They fell to the ground in a pitter-patter. Wasn't it too much? Liang Lu was a professional maintenance soldier proficient in the skill of segmentation. He frowned when he saw this. But he didn't say anything. After taking over the authority of the probe ball, he controlled it to withdraw from the secondary tunnel and turn it back to the dedicated maintenance vehicle. At the same time, he gathered his highly concentrated spirit waves and formed an energy-gathering halo that interfered and supported the mental plane. This highly concentrated halo looked like a lighthouse piercing through the darkness from afar if one were to use soul strength to clairvoyance. It enveloped the two people in the specialized maintenance vehicle within the radiance, forming a sealed safe zone. At the same time, it gave the relay station's backup power a more precise direction, ready to receive the support of the jade crystal array at any time. This was Lighthouse. It was a derivative skill of the strong light flashlight. Its function wasn't too obvious within the base, but in the field combat area, this was a godly skill for a single soldier to call for backup. It was unknown how many people had relied on this to survive. Similarly, there were quite a few idiots who exposed their positions during unessential times. They became living targets for the enemy, dying without an intact corpse. In any case, from Liang Lu's point of view, this skill was most suitable for a recruit like Luo Nan. Perhaps one day he would rely on this skill to survive. He originally wanted to use this skill to test Luo Nan step by step. He wanted to mention a few things to take note of to prevent this young fellow, who lacked common sense, from losing his life in a muddle-headedness due to this matter. He never expected that not only would he fail to test Luo Nan with just a few words, he would also become Liang Lu's job. And from then on, Liang Lu was reduced to an auxiliary soldier. He gave the most technical content to Luo Nan, who had just officially taken up his post not too long ago. It looked like Luo Nan was quite confident, but Liang Lu was still a bit worried. He used the standard array to give a partial support to Luo Nan for the sake of safety. When the two were carrying out their official mission, they would follow the requirements of the drill manual. The frame of their body and soul and the corresponding energy flow would be linked through the dynamo cores. They would form the classic standard combat array of the military, which was referred to as the standard array. This was to realize the effect of 1 + 1 greater than 2. Luo Nan felt it as well. He nodded towards Liang Lu. Liang Lu indicated to the young fellow to concentrate. Luo Nan expressed that he understood, but a portion of his mind was still drifting. There was nothing he could do. Every time this happened, he couldn't help but think that the so-called standard array was simply a replica of the formatting domain. However, the formatting domain was more unbridled in its application on the mental plane. The standard array, on the other hand, required more flexibility in terms of personnel requirements. It had a variety of split and merge structures, and its core was more rigorous and thorough. It was the result of repeated tempering. After exiting the game, he should be able to refer to the standard array and properly study Captain Jimmy's state. Part of Luo Nan's mind was diverted, but it was more than enough to deal with the several hundred centometers scattered on the ground. The so-called segmentator was actually a kind of mechanical crawler the size of a grain of rice. Following Luo Nan's control of psychic waves, its built-in microchip was activated. Amidst the rustling sounds, the egg-like chrysalis that were on standby transformed into something similar to the working form of ants. Luo Nan's thoughts changed again, and over 500 mechanical ants fought to be the first to pounce at the suspected leaking area. At first, it felt like a chaotic charge, but in the space of a breath, they formed a standard crescent-shaped formation. They were like pincers that unfolded in both directions. The encirclement range grew larger and larger, but the basic formation wasn't the slightest bit chaotic. Beautiful! Liang Lu muttered. Before Luo Nan's voice could fall, a portion of the mechanical ants buzzed and flew up. They completely broke away from the restrictions of the terrain, pulling open an even more unrestrained array structure in the three-dimensional space. Liang Lu subconsciously sucked in a breath. The advance and changes of the mechanical ants exceeded the range of his vision from the very beginning. He relied on the feedback of the equipment and the mental plane to sense them. The more he did this, the more he was able to feel the configuration logic hidden within the rapid split and merge of several hundred mechanical ants. So reckless! Luo Nan had already entered a relatively focused state with the help of the front-end operations. He turned a deaf ear to Liang Lu's praise and astonishment. 3 days in Heaven Abyss time. 40 hours in Earth time. Luo Nan learned quite a bit in the relay station. This included maintenance and repair of spare parts, assembly and manufacturing of machinery and equipment, patrol and maintenance of the relay station's infrastructure, pipelines. He even did a drill of emergency repairs to key areas during wartime. These were all extremely important things to learn. He was very interested in all of them. But there was still one content that made him unconsciously invest even more energy into it. Sinful poison. This was a phenomenon that could only possibly exist in the light concealment system. Too much prior knowledge was needed to describe its cause, origin, and development process. This included, but was not limited to, ancient gods and new gods, the creation, development, and inheritance of the Heaven-Abyss spirit network, research on the relationship between hereditary species and ancient gods, the production and differentiation of fantasy species, the two wars of gods, the founding history of the Heavenly Yuan Empire, research on Lord Zhanhe, special research on Sin Calamity. There were many complex courses that Luo Nan would not be able to complete in half his life. Many of these were not within the scope of general education. Even the professionals of the Heavenly Yuan Empire might not be able to explain them clearly. They even argued with each other because of different directions or standpoints. They even attacked each other endlessly. At present, Luo Nan could only clearly understand one basic concept. The so-called sinful poison was some inconceivably powerful existences fighting over or defending the Heaven-Abyss spirit network, the greatest invention since the birth of the universe. The sinful poison warped part of the framework of the Heaven-Abyss spirit network and the surrounding space-time structure of the light concealment system. In the end, the sinful poison formed a terrifying negative effect within a certain range of space-time. Some of the information directly regarded the sinful poison as a kind of corpse poison. The so-called corpse referred to the indescribable and unimaginable remains of powerful existences that perished in the bitter struggle for ultimate authority over the Heaven-Abyss spirit network. Of course, this also included the twisted wills of the remnant souls, the laws of destruction, the collapsed space-time, and the gods and believers that attached themselves to them. In the end, the innumerable wreckage of corpses and dead souls became the breeding ground for the sinful poison. In the end, this terrifying poison was pushed to the regions where all life and consciousness existed. It endlessly mutated and multiplied, forming a completely new ecology under the distorted framework of the Heaven-Abyss spirit network. Doesn't this look a bit familiar? Chapter 905. There was no doubt that the first thing Luo Nan thought of when he understood the basic concept of sin poison was the mutant infection. It was the mutant era that started on Earth 50 years ago. There were certain similarities between the external appearances of the two. Luo Nan even had the basis and space to go a step further in his association. But if he were to strictly compare the two, there were still many differences besides the similarities. Luo Nan didn't have enough knowledge to make an accurate analysis. He could only take an even more serious attitude to understand the relevant information, to study and verify it. He believed that the knowledge he learned in the game scene would be very, very useful. The Hongguang system was once the holy land of the founding ruler of the Heavenly Yuan Empire. It was the greatest and longest-lasting victim of the terrifying negative effects of sin poison. It was to the point that the era after the birth of sin poison was called the Calamity Era in history textbooks. Since the beginning of the Calamity Era, the remnant citizens of the Heavenly Yuan Empire in the Hongguang system struggled to survive for several thousand years. But they were powerless to break through the curse of sin poison. Because of the existence of sin poison, many advanced civilizations in the universe took strict precautions and hid them while they were down. They were trapped in a limited star domain, watching helplessly as the enormous empire that spanned 10 billion light-years and endless space-time crumbled. Although the Hongguang system still maintained a complete military and political system of the Heavenly Yuan Empire, its strength was no longer the same as it was during the empire's heyday. The people of the Hongguang system were tormented to the point they wished they were dead. But on the other hand, they were able to persevere for such a long time and still maintain a considerable amount of strength. The Imperial Army of the Hongguang system was certainly the group of people in the universe most adept at dealing with sin poison. In fact, the military's tactical and technical manuals that Luo Nan had seen had detailed and targeted arrangements made in regards to the various common forms of the existence of sin poison. Through war after war, these techniques, experiences, and the crystallization of blood were instilled into the brains of every combat personnel of the Empire. As for how effective the usage was, it depended on the individual. But no matter what, any soldier of the Empire that had been in the army for more than half a year had a yardstick in their hearts. Their accuracy would vary based on the amount of experience they had. Right now, Liang Lu, Luo Nan's superior officer, was a bit uncertain. Although he believed in Luo Nan's ability to carry out the technical manuals, he still had some reservations in his heart as to how far Luo Nan could carry it out in actual combat. After all, there were more than 500 syncopators. Even for him, who came from the school of creation, controlling them wasn't as easy as flipping his hand. Especially when Luo Nan was so reckless. Liang Lu was able to feel that Luo Nan was quite open in his control of the syncopator. Luo Nan was able to detect and adjust the information back and forth. Luo Nan suppressed the upper limits set by the drill manual for the micro-control of his soul strength. He sought perfection. But this was often the time when a recruit was in trouble. Steady, steady. Liang Lu couldn't stop mumbling. At the same time, he used his authority as a superior to activate the automatic switching function. Luo Nan's operating privileges would automatically transfer to Liang Lu if Luo Nan made multiple consecutive mistakes or if he made a single major mistake under this setup. Frankly speaking, if Liang Lu were to operate the syncopator according to his plan, he wouldn't be so serious. But this was Liang Lu's first time leading an army. The default setting for consecutive errors was 5 times. Liang Lu hesitated for a moment and changed it to 3 times. However, before he could confirm it, he changed it back again. If he approved of the soldiers under him normally, there was no reason for him not to approve on the battlefield. Even if he might lose a life, it was more likely that he would gain a life. This was the instruction of Colonel Shang Zhan. Of course he had to follow it. Besides, this wasn't a time of life and death yet. Liang Lu let out a long breath. He no longer cared about the switching of privileges. He gritted his teeth to maintain the stability of his words and thoughts. He followed the duties of a superior officer and pointed out some important matters. Pay attention. Don't pay attention to living evil poisons. Luo Nan didn't respond. He just nodded silently. Most of the time, especially in verbal communication, people often described evil poisons as a type of toxin, a type of germ. This was easier to understand. But in formal discussions, there was absolutely no way to view it as a toxin or germ. It was only viewed as a special environment and law. The most basic logic was this. The powerful existences that nurtured evil poisons were the rulers of space, time, and the laws. The negative effects they gave rise to were the same. Faced with the vast and boundless environment of space and time, as well as the infiltration of the fundamental law system, it was impossible to completely eliminate the contamination. The only way was to use the environment against the environment, to use law against law. In order to restore the positive effects of the Heaven Abyss Spirit Network to the greatest extent possible, the Jade Crystal Array was created to cover the main inhabited areas. It was capable of long-distance connections across star domains. It became the Jade Crystal Array that the Hongguang star system relied on to support the vile environment wreaking havoc within the evil poisons. But in the front lines, the crisscrossing law environment caused the protective strength of the Jade Crystal Array to drop by a large margin. As a result, all sorts of negative effects were born. The living evil poisons were one of these negative effects. Once again, it was emphasized that evil poisons were not toxins. They were not living beings either. However, evil poisons could breed many forms of living beings. This included flesh and blood creations on the material plane. There were also living beings that were pure thoughts on the mental plane. Especially things like mutants, darksider species. Luo Nan once again thought of mutants. But in the theoretical system of the Heaven Abyss Empire, there was no need to talk about those distorted flesh and blood creations. Sentient beings had a special name. Fantasy species. According to the general knowledge teaching materials of the Heaven Abyss Empire, after the appearance of the Heaven Abyss Spirit Network, the minds of the universe's living beings became more effective in interfering with the material plane. This magnified the power of the mental plane. The desires and knowledge of trillions of living beings, as well as the pointless power of faith that was cast towards the ancient gods but was destined to receive no response, all warped and mapped together, creating a marvelous existence within the sea of the mind. They were the creations of consciousness, desire, and information. They naturally did not have a material foundation, but they borrowed the power of the Heaven Abyss Spirit Network to rapidly grow. In the end, for some reason, they gave birth to the terrifying evil god represented by the sin of the 6 heavens. They ignited the first all-domain war of gods since the creation of the world. They were the main culprits behind the arrival of the evil calamity world. Truth be told, from the perspective of an earthling, this didn't seem like the standard teaching materials of an advanced civilization. It was more like some mythological book. It was hard for Luo Nan to not have some doubts in his mind, but he knew that this wasn't the time for him to doubt the authenticity of the information. He could only put all of his mental energy into learning and absorbing during this rare period of opportunity. Things like dispelling the false and retaining the true could be left for later. What he needed to do right now was to strictly follow the drill manual in this highly realistic game scene. He needed to verify the crystallization of thousands of years of war wisdom of the Hongguang star system. The living sinful body formed a low-intensity, short-time contamination under the cover of the jade crystal array. It was possible that it was a young fantasy breed that was born in the sinful poisonous environment. It was also possible that it was a fantasy breed that suffered contamination after it was formed. Regardless of which case it was, the follow-up treatment would be carried out by a specialized department. What Luo Nan needed to do as a maintenance soldier was to find the area that could possibly be contaminated. He needed to clean this area and apply a temporary patch. If he did this well, he would destroy the environment in which the living sinful body grew. This would reduce a lot of trouble for the follow-up work, and vice versa. Over 500 mechanical ants penetrated deep into the secondary passageway of Guan 542. Under the support of Luo Nan's soul strength, their built-in microsensors worked with high efficiency. They automatically transmitted data of the surrounding environment. Luo Nan and Liang Lu formed a standard array calculation module to conduct an in-depth analysis. Right now, Luo Nan needed to support the operation of over 500 mechanical ants. He needed to maintain their detection configuration. He also needed to make fine adjustments based on the results of the analysis. He needed to lock onto an accurate position. In a moment, he needed to guide the jade crystal array's support power according to the real environment to carry out cleaning and repairs. He was multitasking, and all of them were precise operations. It was no wonder that Liang Lu was worried and wanted Luo Nan to stabilize. But Luo Nan didn't feel that it was all that difficult. It wasn't because he had learned the secret technique of overall planning from Dean Wan early on. It was because from his perspective, no matter how complicated the specific details were, the core of the operation was unified from beginning to end. It was just like how the military's tactical and technical manual stated the essence of the sinful poison from the very beginning. Everything was a distortion of the space-time environment and laws. As long as one understood this point, the 10,000 changes would not deviate from the core. In Luo Nan's eyes, the standard array that he and Liang Lu had constructed together, the hundreds of centimeters, the secondary passageway of Guam 542 that was suspected to be polluted, the relay station that extended endlessly along the pipeline tunnel. Of course, this included the multiple overlapping void environments that currently supported this base. All of these were nothing more than configuration frames that were endlessly switched and arranged. But all configurations were orderly in the end. Even if there was some sort of disharmony between these simple and complex layers upon layers of nested configuration frames that interacted with each other, bringing interference to the instrument's detection, as long as one grasped the basic relationships within, the so-called interference was nothing more than the whirlpools of life and death in the vast ocean. One would be able to grasp the overall direction and deep rules after seeing it many times. Luo Nan was like a fish that naturally knew how to swim when it came to the foundation of his superb level of mental senses and his attainments in configuration. He was most proficient in tossing and turning in this sort of environment. Similarly, he possessed considerable sensitivity toward the external pollution that clearly departed from the essence of a body of water. His keenness was directly reflected in the sensitivity of the scintometers in front of him. An alarm was transmitted back practically the moment the vanguard of the mechanical ant array broke into the relevant area. Liang Lu opened his mouth to speak. Aside from reminding Luo Nan, he was also reporting the progress to the command platform. Guan 542 sequence. Worker bee units between 3321 and 3328. Coordinates. The calculation module of the standard array marked the virtual area roughly corresponding to it in a bright red color. Luo Nan followed the drill manual and gave a verbal report. The scintometers are in place. The base number is 528. The requirements are met. The jade crystal array is linked effectively. Beginning segmentation. Several hundred mechanical ants either stuck close to the pipe or hung in midair as soon as his voice fell. Their entire and individual movements froze at the same time. And before they froze, the 528 mechanical ants had already completed the required actions and the arranged configuration frames. They had passed the strict review of the standard design module of the standard array. At the same time, the highest level AI of the relay station, Ant QA, responded with a gentle voice by their ears. Application approved. Liang Lu subconsciously swept the relevant timing area, and his eyelids suddenly jumped. He captured a tiny number that was 3 orders of magnitude lower than the basic time. 0.002 of a breath? This wasn't an error. It was the time needed to smooth out the error. Liang Lu didn't even have time to ponder the deeper meaning of this number. The bodies of the two people in the special maintenance vehicle trembled. The vast power of the jade crystal array of the relay station swept over them. It was like an electric shock, but it was a kind of synchronized trend in the rules. Luo Nan narrowed his eyes. He liked this kind of trend. Chapter 906. When the power of the jade crystal array passed through the stable link and was added to the configuration array formed by the syntome, Luo Nan's duty as a small maintenance soldier was completed. This sort of low-intensity pollution was probably nothing more than a minor ailment to the relay station. Luo Nan didn't even have the time to carefully observe the living nefarious poison or the specific form of the nefarious poison environment before the polluted area was swept clean and patched. The specialized backup department followed up in a timely manner. They soon arrived and sealed off the scene to carry out follow-up actions. According to the drill manual, not only did Luo Nan and Liang Lu not have the qualifications to participate further, they also had to accept detailed questioning. The degree of detail made it seem as if Luo Nan and Liang Lu had become infected. Liang Lu was quite open-minded about this. Be content with what you have. When the time comes when you don't have the time to do identification work, that would be a huge problem. The war was going well at the beginning of Sin Calamity. A base of 10,000 people was drained to death in an instant. A living sin poison of the great sovereign level escaped, and it was forcefully fed. Who could we go to at that time to reason with? A powerful great sovereign level expert practically stood at the apex of the heavenly Yuan Empire's personal evolution system. Above them were rulers, gods, and other supreme levels. Even though Luo Nan lacked perceptual knowledge of the concept of a great sovereign, Liang Lu's expression was full of emotion. It made people shiver. Liang Lu comforted him in turn. Don't be nervous. The jade crystal array was quite imperfect back then. We fought countless unjust battles. Things aren't like this now. Liang Lu couldn't hold back his words as he spoke. Think about how many founding lords had immortal bodies. At the beginning of the Great Chaos, they fought for millions and millions of light years to return to the ancestral planet. They killed their way through the Stargate and trampled through the checkpoint. The two sides were clearly looking at each other, but they were forever corrupted by the sin poison. Forget it. Let's not talk about these vexing matters. I'll give you one last piece of information. The early history of Sin Calamity has the lowest average score among all the literature and history subjects. If you can harden your heart and study it, you'll be able to get a higher score for the specialist examination. Luo Nan's lips twitched as he gave a response. Liang Lu let out a breath and adjusted his mood. He returned to the matter at hand. I say, how did you do it in such a short amount of time? Ha! Over here, look over here. I bet he broke the recruit's record. Luo Nan also glanced at the relevant data. 0.02 of a breath, multiplied by 5, was roughly 10 milliseconds. He didn't think that there was much meaning to this data, so he just let out an "oh" and didn't say anything else. Liang Lu maintained his smile, gritted his teeth, and slapped him on the thigh. The superior is asking you a question. Luo Nan just felt that this was ridiculous. Follow the drill manual. Advance in formation. Once you get close, choose a suitable segmenting structure. Then it's time to test your microcontrol. And don't all the segmenting instruments have automatic adjustment functions? Do you think I've never used a syncopator? As a professional, Liang Lu was not easily fooled. He directly pulled up the maintenance manual and clicked on the relevant entry. What do you mean by choosing a suitable segmentation structure? Do you think I don't know that the automatic adjustment of the segmenting structure needs to be done after manual selection? There are 20 major items and over 400 minor items. Even if the corresponding items in the specific environment can be reduced to 5, there will be 1 or 2 corrections and adjustments in order to pass the inspection of our standard array. There will also be Aunt Kuei's final examination. The time taken will be between 1/10 of a breath to half a breath at the very least. There's an order of magnitude difference, okay? You're basically reaching your goal in one step. You're sticking a pole all the way to the end. It can't be a coincidence, right? Luo Nan blinked. It's that complicated? According to his own logic, the relay station, the pipeline tunnel, the secondary tunnel of Guam 542, and other mechanical constructs were all reflections of some sort of configuration. They were manufactured and solidified by people to solve certain practical problems. However, they were limited by the various laws of the material world. A few undesirable burrs appeared when many aspects were combined. What Luo Nan did was to temporarily smooth out these burrs. Of course, he couldn't forcefully do it. He couldn't do it, but the segmenting apparatus he controlled was truly a good thing. These seemingly fragmented mechanical ants with simple individual structures actually went through the tempering of a classic design. They were able to restore the free space of the configuration design on the mental plane to the greatest limit. What Luo Nan did was to add a few auxiliary lines to the restricted configuration creation within this free design space. He created a few peripherals, temporarily pushing them to a relatively perfect state. He plugged the holes and provided a better environment for the powerful support of the jade crystal array. This was actually similar to the test questions in the 100-year sequence. The conditions and the question were all given. All he needed to do was to clearly think through the question and then write the answer. Oh, actually, he didn't even need to write the answer. This was actually a multiple-choice question. Liang Lu spoke of 20 major items and over 400 minor items. Every item was an extremely classic and exquisite configuration design. It could be widely used in practically all combat scenarios. All the user needed to do was to choose the correct answer from among them. These segmenting configuration designs were simply godly secrets to Luo Nan. He spent a large amount of time to study and memorize them. Even though the amount of time he spent studying them was short, and he might not be able to use them freely in the complex combat environment of the wilderness, the difficulty of the questions was greatly simplified in the near-ideal environment of the base. The number of items to choose from were greatly reduced as well. It would be a waste of his life if he couldn't use them well. From Luo Nan's perspective, the scene just now didn't have any interference options. There was only one correct answer. Of course, Luo Nan definitely wouldn't say these words in front of Liang Lu. He also knew that his understanding of configuration was built upon the foundation of countless domain fragments and space-time structures. He was a bit different from Liang Lu, a top student of orthodox birth. He even far surpassed Liang Lu to a certain degree. But he wasn't willing to stab Liang Lu's self-esteem, even if he was just an NPC in the game. Luo Nan simply shut his mouth and didn't say anything. At the same time, he hoped that the chaos mechanism of the game would display its effect and quickly deceive this plot. For the time being, it was hard to say whether or not the Innerverse simulator heard the operator's request. But the subsequent developments were indeed as Luo Nan wished. Liang Lu originally wanted to continue discussing the efficiency of the segmenting device with Luo Nan, but a call came in at this time. His expression turned a bit heavy when he saw the display. He adjusted his breathing for a moment before choosing to accept the call. He didn't give the other party the chance to speak at all. He spoke in a rapid-fire manner. "Officer Xiao, you are an infected member of the nefarious poison. The vicinity of your work area is suspected to be contaminated. According to Article 14 of the Wartime Environmental Control Regulations, you have failed the random inspection. Right now, please immediately hand over your work to the deputy on duty and enter a sealed standby state. Please maintain a stable state of mind. If necessary, inject a sedative." Liang Lu was sluggish for half a second before he could complete his last sentence. In the next instant, even Luo Nan, who was next to him, heard the heavy sound of a wall being smashed on the other side. Liang Lu hung up the call with a dark expression. Luo Nan hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Gongshi." Liang Lu pursed his lips and didn't speak at first. But in the end, his lips twitched under Luo Nan's gaze. "Zhan Xiao, this really is troublesome. Are you sure that the nefarious poison's contamination this time is related to Officer Xiao? I'd rather believe it. It's better than having a flower bloom in the center in the end. There are far too many lessons in this area. They are far too painful. No one dares to treat it lightly." Liang Lu spoke, then he became a bit fidgety. But without Zhan Xiao, the space-time environment monitor would immediately go limp. This is a very dangerous matter. Right now we're still surrounded. There's no way to send it back. There were many things that Luo Nan didn't quite understand in Liang Lu's words, but it wasn't good to ask right now. He could only try to comfort Liang Lu. "I wonder if there's a way to be promoted to officer?" Promoted to officer. Liang Lu wanted to say something, but he cut himself off. In the end, he probably felt that he had lost his composure. He forced himself to reveal a stiff smile. "Forget it. Let's go. There's nothing for us to do here. To tell the truth, we should have gone to borrow the out-of-print all-encompassing camera before we came. Luonan went, "Ah." He was a bit disappointed. Of course, it wasn't because of the out-of-print camera. It was because he wanted to go take a look at the scene and understand the true details of the nefarious poison environment. However, Luonan couldn't do anything since his superiors had spoken. He could only sulk and start up the specialized maintenance vehicle. He waited for Liang Lu to greet the personnel sealing off the scene before slowly heading back. The vehicle entered an automatic patrol mode. Luonan had nothing to do for a time, so he casually grabbed a syncopator from the probing ball and fiddled with it. He pondered over this seemingly simple yet extremely exquisite structure. It was truly a great invention. Aside from the high rate of battle damage, there were practically no flaws. Luonan thought that he would definitely make a batch for himself when he got out of the game setting. This toy had a rather vast application space in Earth spacetime, even without the support of the Jade Crystal Array. The moment this thought arose, he pulled out the instruction manual and studied the material composition and related craftsmanship of this little toy. This was all for the sake of reproducing it as completely as possible in Earth spacetime. Liang Lu was endlessly bewildered as he watched from the side. Could this be the reason why Luonan chose the ultra-efficient manual? He hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he tossed aside his non-existent face. He also grabbed a syncopator and gathered together with Luonan. They studied and discussed, and he did his best to ask for guidance without batting an eyelid. Of course, Luonan wouldn't refuse. But before he could say more than a few words, another call came in from Liang Lu's side. This time it was through the mission channel. Liang Lu's figure suddenly straightened in the next second. "Colonel promotion." "Yes." "We'll head back immediately." Luonan had already begun to control the vehicle to make a U-turn as he spoke. By the time the call ended, the specialized maintenance vehicle was already speeding along the road they came from. Luonan just casually asked, "What's wrong?" Liang Lu's eyebrows jumped. He was a bit puzzled. "Colonel Promotion has personally arrived at the scene. He wants to do a replay." Chapter 907. Liang Lu's bewilderment was very normal. This was because on-the-spot review work was not within the scope of Field Officer Shang Zhan's responsibilities. Shang Zhan was the supervisor of 2 Honeycomb. At the same time, he was also the actual person in charge of the logistics department of the relay station. However, the scope of his authority was mainly in the maintenance of infrastructure and equipment, as well as the wartime production, assembly, and maintenance of the dynamo core and other high-precision equipment. Even if it happened within his jurisdiction, there would still be a specialized department that would come over to handle such a highly specialized business like the handling of evil poison. He shouldn't have overstepped his authority to command related work. However, after Liang Lu's initial astonishment, he was unable to pay attention to the deeper reasoning. After receiving Field Officer Shang Zhan's order to personally review the work, Luonan couldn't remain calm and collected. This came from the pressure of his profession. Hurry, hurry, hurry. Organize the work records again. They have to be especially concise. The key points should be highlighted. The context should be clear. We absolutely can't waste his time. Luonan was a bit stupefied. Liang Lu explained very seriously. Field Officer Shang Zhan was a famous busy man in the relay station. The consequences of wasting his time. Did you see his fist the size of his head? All right, Luonan had heard that Field Officer Shang Zhan's professional standards were on the same level as his violent temper. It was under the deterrence of Liang Lu's iron fist that Liang Lu was the one who did the streamlining work, even though he had given the order. These words were more like Liang Lu cheering for himself. Luonan was idle the entire way, but it was actually only 100 seconds of time. The high-speed maintenance vehicle had already returned to the place where they were previously stationed. There were a few more people here compared to before they left. The professionals who were responsible for identifying them had now become receptionists. They were pointing out the true coordinates of the incident to the newcomers. However, Field Officer Shang Zhan wasn't among them. The arrival of the specialized maintenance vehicle drew everyone's attention. Luonan's eyes were sharp. He saw that there was a person among the group of people who was probably familiar with Liang Lu. He smiled in their direction. The vehicle stopped, and Liang Lu kept his head lowered as he struggled with his work records. He only woke up with a start when Luonan poked him. He raised his eyes and saw an old acquaintance in the crowd. He was a bit shocked. He immediately jumped out of the vehicle and greeted the person. "Senior, how come you're here?" Luo Nan still carried out the military bearing and attitude of an outstanding recruit. He got off the car at practically the same time as Liang Lu and stood ramrod straight to the side. That person was still smiling. Even though he couldn't see the work area on the virtual interface, he accurately evaluated Liang Lu's previous work. "You came quite quickly, but I still remember that promotion officers hate meaningless, perfect formalism." Liang Lu rolled his eyes and drawled, "That's why I'm getting out of the car now and having a meaningful chat with Senior." It was obvious that they had a good relationship. Liang Lu didn't forget that this was the first soldier he had ever led in his life. He turned his head and reminded Luo Nan, "Come. Meet our base's assault spearhead, the Empire's war hero, my senior, Lieutenant Lu Andy." On the other side, Lond added in a timely manner, "Group." Luo Nan understood his meaning. Luo Nan was referring to the Empire's war hero, which was a collective honor. It was different from individual merits. Luo Nan's honor had dropped by a notch, but Luo Nan's modest conduct naturally gave rise to a favorable impression. Luo Nan puffed out his chest and stood straight. "Hello, Lieutenant." Liang Lu even specifically introduced Luo Nan to Lieutenant Lu Andy. He imitated the tone of a seasoned veteran. "Luo Nan, my soldier. He's an elite seed of the 100-year sequence. He's a great lad who can accurately control the division structure within 0.02 of a breath." Luo Nan felt that there was a more appropriate evaluation, but he forcefully swallowed it back down. A freak who sacrificed his common sense. Luo Nan laughed again. "You speak as if you could have done it long ago." Liang Lu's white face turned a bit red when he was exposed in an instant. But he had already mentally prepared himself on the road, so he wasn't really angry. Luo Nan was a bit embarrassed, but soon Luo Nan returned the greeting. "Hello, Private." Luo Nan knew that Luo Nan was a middle-aged man with a normal physique. Actually, Luo Nan wasn't too clear on the average lifespan and age of the citizens of the Heavenly Yuan Empire. He just felt that this Lieutenant Lu had a bit of vicissitudes of life. In fact, the first impression was more blunt and direct. This was because one could see that there was an obvious thick scar on Luo's neck that extended from the collar of his military uniform. It extended from the left side of his neck all the way below the root of his ear on the same side, and then radiated to the area behind his head. The scar was ash-gray in color, seeming to be an old wound. Luo Nan was able to sense that there was a rather dense distribution of metal beneath the scar. At least a third of this person's chest cavity and skull structure was an artificial creation that was implanted after birth. Whether it was visual perception or perception, it was a bit sinister. However, this Lieutenant Lu loved to smile. The corners of his mouth would always curve upwards regardless of whether he was talking or not. There were some fine wrinkles at the corners of his eyes that were highly compatible with his smile. It was precisely this sort of expression and habit that offset the visual impact of his external appearance. It made people feel very naturally that he was an amiable and friendly person. It was just that the originally harmonious structure of his body and mind had been partially destroyed by external injuries. Luo Nan believed that this was a senior with a story behind him. What's more, Luo Nan also saw that this lieutenant's pitch-black uniform had an eye-catching silver armband that didn't conform to the norm. It was a spiral representing the heaven ladder. There was also an even more abstract symbol of 3 nested rings in the middle. Liang Lu had once taught Luo Nan similar points of knowledge. This represented the holder of the armband. Even though this armband didn't fully reach the level of being able to lead an army and be bestowed nobility, or be promoted to the seat developing technique, he had innovated in a certain field, bravely climbed the heaven ladder, and made some breakthroughs. Only then would he obtain this sort of honor. The 3 nested rings referred to the 3 crucial steps of furnace formation, technique deployment, and internal refinement, after the completion of the basic internal cultivation. It was also known as the life furnace. It was the most crucial stage in breaking the inherent logic of the genetic inheritance of a race. It was the most crucial stage in breaking free from the innate shackles. This was quite amazing. While Luo Nan was secretly evaluating this person, Liang Lu was exchanging information with Lu Andy. "Senior, did your frontline fierce man come here to steal credit? I obey orders to assist in the investigation." Aside from the open scars, not a single edge could be seen on Lu Andy from top to bottom, from inside to outside. Even though he was speaking seriously, he didn't have too much of an air of doing official business. This sort of appearance really didn't match the title of Assault Vanguard. Liang Lu didn't react in time. He laughed in spite of himself. It's not easy. You guys finally discovered the hardships of us worker bees? Lu Andy maintained his smile. Are you going to let Colonel Shang see you chatting meaningfully in a bit? Lu Andy didn't say anything more. He gestured with his hand, indicating that they could head towards the true location of the incident. Liang Lu finally came to his senses. His expression turned serious, and he gave a salute in sync with Luo Nan. He tossed the specialized maintenance vehicle to the side and turned into the much narrower Guan B 542 secondary passageway. Luo Nan never thought that he would be able to approach the evil and poisonous environment that he was extremely interested in so quickly. He was quite excited, and his footsteps were light and quick. However, Liang Lu, who was beside Luo Nan, had a load on his mind. He walked more and more sluggish, unconsciously falling behind by more than half a body's length. He muttered to himself, "A lot of people are coming." Luo Nan turned his face in confusion. He didn't understand what Liang Lu meant. I'm saying that it's not just Colonel Shang who's coming to review the situation. Senior is currently the captain of Sir Shi Yuan's personal guard. If he comes, Sir Shi will most likely come as well. Even if Sir Tang doesn't come, Sir Hui will come as well. It won't be easy for Zhang Xiao to pass. During this time, Luo Nan more or less understood the basic division of the ranks of nobles, sergeants, and illustrious nobles in the army. He also roughly understood who the high-level commanders of the relay station were. Right now, he was able to match every name that Liang Lu said. Sir Shi Yuan was a third-class noble, and he served as the commander of the relay station's mobility unit. Although he had less than 1,000 people under his command, and his responsibility was singular, being only responsible for charging and killing on the battlefield, the lowest rank of his subordinates was a third-class sergeant major. All of them were elites picked out of 100. Sir Tang Tong was a second-class Star Lord. She had the highest rank among the 12 illustrious nobles of the relay station. The highest officer of the base was only on par with her. She served as the person in charge of the logistics department. But the concept of logistics was big logistics. In short, she was in charge of everything that had nothing to do with direct combat command. Sir Chong Yihue was a third-class noble, and he served as Sir Tang Tong's assistant. He was also Colonel Shang's immediate superior. However, Shang Zhan was in charge of almost all the technical matters. Most of the specific matters were handled by him. But the department in charge was directly related to today's matter. Jingming Agency. This was a rather awkward name, and it seemed to involve allusions to the Heaven Abyss civilization. Luo Nan had to expend quite a bit of effort to achieve a more accurate translation. From the meaning of the words alone, this was a tranquil and serene administrative organization. To be more precise, it was a central department that wanted to achieve the goal of tranquil and serene. It was aimed at the environment of evil poison, and it was also an organization that specialized in dealing with evil poison. Luo Nan properly straightened out the positions and authority of these big shots, and he finally understood Liang Lu's meaning. They came over to deal with Colonel Xiao. Just like how they dealt with the source of the infection? Deal with the person or deal with the matter? This is the question. Liang Lu's brows were locked tight. Luo Nan's understanding of the situation was far too little. He was unable to make a further analysis. At this moment, they were already very close to the contaminated area that had been patched. Luo Nan had long since seen that there were quite a few people standing in this relatively narrow space. Most of them were operating instruments and equipment. They were busy, but there weren't any big shot-level characters among them. Presumably, they hadn't arrived yet. The one with the highest rank was a young colonel. At the same time, he was also the one with the most leisure time. He leaned against the curved inner wall of the passageway. His back was arched inwardly, looking a bit casual. His face was lowered, making it hard to see his expression clearly. But even so, Luo Nan's first impression of him was that his body was slender and coordinated. He was quite handsome. He was an extremely eye-catching character. However, Luo Nan felt that the silver armband on his upper left arm was even more eye-catching. It was a circle of abstract spirals that represented the stairway to heaven. There was also a pattern of a half-closed eye in the middle. Just as Luo Nan was guessing who it was, Liang Lu stopped in his tracks. Zhan Xiao. The sound waves transmitted through the secondary passageway had quite a few refractions and overlaps. It was muffled and not too clear, but the young colonel was still able to sense it in an instant. He raised his head, and the corner of his lips curled up. Officer Liang Lu, your random detection frequency is a bit high. Chapter 908. Zhan Xiao was indeed a rather handsome person. At the very least, the outline of his facial features was in line with Luo Nan's Earth aesthetic standards. His eyes were brilliant, and the corners of his eyes were slightly raised. Their radiance was sharp. Even though Luo Nan was separated by nearly 20 meters, his piercing gaze was quite penetrative. In comparison, his voice seemed quite muffled within the rapidly refracting tunnel. By the time it reached Luo Nan's side, it was already buzzing. Liang Lu's expression darkened, but he didn't respond immediately. He didn't continue forward either. Instead, he turned on his communicator and conveniently sent Luo Nan into it. He was using a device that could communicate across the entire planet. He was separated by 20 meters, and he was speaking to the target personnel. His words were full of sarcasm. Officer Xiao, a problem can be found with the most basic of random sampling. What do you want me to do? At first glance, it sounded like these two were about to shed all pretense of cordiality when they spoke. However, the curve of Zhan Zhao's lips was even more obvious. He no longer paid attention to any rank. Speaking of which, you might be disappointed. I already made a will when I joined the army. Even if something happens to me, the designated beneficiary of the out-of-print sound source will be Sister Ming. It won't be your turn to have a heartless mouth like you. Liang Lu spat. Don't call me Sister Ming. Her Highness may not remember a distant relative like you. Liang Lu immediately became alert after the first sentence was said. Your brain is broken. You're starting to have delusions. Speaking of which, didn't they feed you medicine? Luo Nan watched the two spit at each other from a distance, but he didn't feel too much hostility. It was just as he understood in the past. Liang Lu and Zhan Zhao's friendship was quite deep. Liang Lu's choice to use his communicator wasn't an act of taking off his pants and farting. It must be known that Zhan Zhao's current position was separated from the tunnel by the seemingly busy full-time personnel of the Jingming administration. Unless they forcefully charged through the crowd, they could only spit insults at each other. The personnel of the Jingming administration were quite quiet. They allowed Liang Lu and Zhan Xiao to spit insults at each other. They did what they needed to do. There was practically no reaction. At most, one person came over to Liang Lu and Luo Nan's side to tell them to maintain a safe distance. He also made a mark on the retina interface of the two. Through an effect similar to AR, Luo Nan could clearly see that Zhan Xiao had already drawn a prison. Zhan Zhao's range of activity was limited to a radius of several meters with Zhan Xiao as the center. Zhan Xiao was isolated from the normal world. It was precisely in this situation that Liang Lu lacked the mood to escalate the war of words. He simply introduced Luo Nan to Zhan Xiao, just like how he introduced Luo Nan to Lu Andy. It was still the same elite seed, segmentation and accuracy, and so on. Of course, the most outstanding one was still the my soldier's attribute judgment. Zhan Xiao wasn't as polite as Lu Andy. He just nodded towards Luo Nan. Luo Nan was separated by such a distance. If Luo Nan's eyes and mental senses weren't as good, he would have missed the opportunity. But this person turned around and stabbed Liang Lu in the heart. You have such a poor vocabulary to say the same words twice in a minute. Do you really know how to embarrass our Shoujing Academy? Or is this the only bright spot you have after joining the army? F***CK. It was only then that Liang Lu remembered that Colonel Xiao in front of him had the blood of the royal family flowing in his veins. He was extremely talented in sensing and specialized in such things. Even in the complicated environment of the front line, 100 meters was nothing to him. Obviously, the conversation between them and Lu Andy had been heard by this fellow. Liang Lu wasn't a particularly thick-skinned person to begin with. This time, he choked quite badly and was momentarily speechless. However, Luo Nan felt that it was more likely that Liang Lu had met him halfway. She was worried that Zhan Zhao's words had been heard by the other party, which made it even more awkward. On the other side, Zhang Xiao was unforgiving.
He glanced over and said, Minister Liang Lu, what's with that expression? Do you feel that the evidence is conclusive, so you want to make an early judgment and deal with me before Sir Hui and the others arrive?
Liang Lu wanted to answer, but in the end, he could only curse indiscriminately. Seeing that Liang Lu was completely speechless, Zhang Xiao finally let out some of the pent-up air in his chest. His tone also lowered, and he seemed to be chatting casually. I don't need you to worry about me. What's the point of worrying about me? The battlefield is the most unpredictable place to begin with. It's just that there are people like Lone who have a tough life, people like you who never improve, and people like me.
What's wrong with you?
Did you play out the appraisal, the disposition, and the funeral in your head? Liang Lu was finally annoyed by Zhang Zhao's words. His emotions surged, and he fiercely spat into the communicator. You still have the face to talk about Senior Lu? 7 years ago you evaluated him. Did you judge him correctly? 4 years ago, you wanted to seal the coffin. Did you seal it? Right now, Senior Lu is right outside. If you have the time to spout nonsense, go kowtow to him and worship him as your master. Senior Lu will definitely teach you the ability to lift a coffin. This wave of verbal abuse caused Zhang Zhao's face to turn green. It was to the extent that a few full-time members of the Jingming administration could no longer maintain their neutral calmness. They turned their heads to look. It was as if they were worried that Zhang Xiao would be careless and directly attack his heart with evil poison, contaminating him on the spot. But in the end, Zhang Xiao just pursed his lips and maintained his silence. Luo Nan was confused listening to this part. Liang Lu actually thought of him.
He used a rather deliberate tone to converse with Luo Nan. Oh, Luo Nan.
I've never told you about Senior Lu before, right? Luo Nan could guess a bit about Liang Lu's thoughts, so he played along very obediently. No. I'm confused.
Hehe. The reason why I solemnly introduced Senior Lu to you just now was so that you could properly get to know a true heroic character.
Senior Lu is different from a certain someone. He is one of the most outstanding and legendary graduates of our Shoujing Academy. He is the type of person that the school will specially invite to the school's anniversary celebration. Zhang Xiao just swept his gaze over from afar, but he listened to Liang Lu's flattery and trampling on the weak. Luo Nan honestly played the role of a supporting character. He went, oh, he's a senior alumnus. What senior? He hadn't graduated yet when I entered the school. Even a certain someone is a year older than him. Luo Nan was immediately shocked. He seriously recalled the face of Lieutenant Lu Andy, who was still standing guard outside the passageway. No matter how hard he tried, he was unable to find any evidence that Lieutenant Lu was only 2 years older than the young and inexperienced Liang Lu and 1 year younger than the young and handsome Zhang Xiao. Could it be that he first joined the military, then accumulated merits and advanced his studies? We're schoolmates in the general knowledge stage. After we graduated, a certain someone relied on his family background to enter the military school. Senior Lu directly enlisted in the military, and I stayed in the specialized school for a few years before enlisting in the military this year. Liang Lu eliminated a reasonable option and gave a standard answer at the same time. Senior Lu is only 2 years older than me.
I'd believe it even if he was 20.
Luo Nan hissed.
He didn't need to act. He already had a shocked appearance. No way.
That's right. He's 1 year younger than a certain someone. Luo Nan looked at Zhang Zhao's slightly gloomy but still handsome and young face.
He clearly knew that Liang Lu had no reason to lie to him, but he still spent some time to adjust his train of thought.
Is it because he's injured? Luo Nan thought of Lu Andy as he spoke. There were clear scars on his chest, neck, and face, as well as a large amount of artificial prosthetics. By Earth standards, this level could already be considered an altered human. That's right. You should know about the Ancestral Defense War 4 years ago. Fortunately, Liang Lu was just asking in passing. Then he supplemented, Senior Lu was in the Ancestral Defense Patrol Fleet at the time. He held the position of Sergeant Major. When faced with the alien species that suddenly broke through the realm and entered, the remnants of the fleet were able to defend the Ancestral Stargate in a situation where over 70% of the fleet was lost in the first wave. They won over Her Highness to lead the army back to aid them. For this reason, he received the title of the Empire's War Hero. Luo Nan could only nod at this time. As for the alien species that Liang Lu mentioned, Luo Nan had some understanding of it during this time. This referred to a living species that could shuttle back and forth between multiple spacetime environments. They possessed the ability to adapt to multiple spacetime laws. They had varying levels of combat power. The weak were extremely weak, and the strong were extremely strong. But their greatest commonality was that they had extremely high endurance and extremely strong survivability. Some species were simply like locusts in the universe. They were like plagues, causing people to change color just by hearing about them. Even an advanced civilization like the Heavenly Yuan Empire would often view them as a natural disaster during their heyday. In the Light Concealment Galaxy, there were a few alien species that had mutated due to the evil poison. They wandered aimlessly through the complex starry sky environment. Every time they appeared in a star domain inhabited by humans, they would bring about catastrophic destruction. For example, the fantasy breed and their servant army that were besieging the relay station were relatively gentle and respectful. Luo Nan lacked sufficient perceptual knowledge of the ancestral defense war back in the day due to his lack of knowledge. But he was able to understand the degree of desperation of this war purely by reasoning. However, Liang Lu's description said that Luan's legend did not come during the war, but after the war. You saw Senior's appearance. Those are all scars left behind from the war. But you didn't see how he looked when he came down from the battlefield. Half his body and half his head were smashed flat. The Stargate Fortress's Jade Crystal Array was overloaded and shut down. They were on the verge of collapsing in hand-to-hand combat. They fought face-to-face with the alien species, and they were immersed in the evil poison environment. They were even more seriously polluted. They were only a hair's breadth away from a destructive mutation. It can be said that nothing can be saved from those kinds of injuries. Senior was a bit lucky and managed to hang on to his life. But the life furnace that he cultivated bitterly for many years in the army completely collapsed. Add to that the disability of his body. He won't be able to stay in the army. He will be a cripple even if he is discharged. Humph. Luo Nan quickly shot a glance at Zhang Xiao. Zhang Zhao's lips held a sneer, but his gaze was a bit fleeting. Liang Lu was ruthless as well. He stabbed at Zhang Zhao's heart like an invisible knife. How did Senior Lu do it? He recovered his consciousness while he was recuperating. He had the energy to research the theories and methods of internal cultivation and internal refinement. He started from the beginning, deducing and experimenting step by step. He endured the pain of his illness for over 3 years. He risked the risk of genetic collapse at any time and overcame countless difficulties. He published over a dozen professional theses and obtained the Heaven Stairway armlet with a half-crippled body. This was much better than a certain someone who relied on his royal bloodline and his inherited treasured texts to earn glory. And in the end, he started with the external force that was implanted into the dynamo core. He guided the external force into the internal force, causing the furnace to restart and reforge. His cultivation has completely recovered, and he has even made progress. He has returned to the army and is still a great man. Even someone as fierce as Sir Sher praises him. Liang Lu's voice grew louder and louder. He had nearly forgotten himself. Right at this moment, a laugh traveled into everyone's ears. Oh my terrible reputation has spread to the 2 beehives? Chapter 909. There was a saying in the Heavenly Yuan Empire that could be translated as, the mouth moves, the ears move. On the one hand, it meant that everything that happens is connected. On the other hand, it meant that even the walls have ears. On the other hand, it meant that, speak of the devil and he will appear. Liang Lu's current situation wasn't just that his mouth and ears moved, but that his entire body moved. This was an exaggeration, but his soul was definitely trembling right now. Just as he was getting carried away, the person in charge of the review had already led his subordinates over in a grandiose manner. It had to be said that Liang Lu's earlier analysis was rather accurate. The most eye-catching person in the group was undoubtedly the sturdy giant at the front. It was Shi Yuan, a third-rank noble known as Vicious. He was half a head taller than the 3-meter-tall Colonel Shangzhan, and had practically come in from the top of the passageway. There was no need to mention his ferocious appearance. Even inside the base, he wore a layer of metal armor that extended to his face and seemed to fuse with his flesh. At this moment, a cold light pulsated as he breathed. From his appearance, he wasn't just a vicious person, he was practically a wolf in sheep's clothing. In comparison, Chang Yihue was a third-rank noble who was much more low-key. Although he walked side by side with Sir Shi Yuan, his height only reached Sir Shi Yuan's waist. Perhaps the contrast was too obvious, but he seemed thinner than a normal person. His face was long and narrow, and his eyes were small. However, Liang Lu was even more afraid of this person. It wasn't just because Sir Chang Yihue was the second in command of the logistics department and was in charge of him. It was also because this person's surname was Chang Yi. Chang Yi was a compound surname, and was the surname of great sovereign Chang Yishuan, the one with the greatest military achievements at the founding of the empire. In the heavenly Yuan Empire, great sovereign Chang Yishuan was also known as the Devil Buster Great Sovereign. Putting aside his great achievements before and after the founding of the nation, in the early days of the era of Sin, during the Dark Age after the fall of the Master of Zhanhe, he dragged his heavily injured body and swept across the Hongguang galaxy in the most violent and poisonous environment. He opened up the most basic living space for the survivors who were on the verge of extinction. In the hundreds of years that followed, he presided over the central area and cut off all the dark hands of the heavenly kingdoms, until he ran out of oil and returned to silence. Even after his death, the inner universe he opened up also transformed into a permanent plane, carrying the most important, jade crystal array of the empire. In the light concealment galaxy, it lit up the flames of survival for the heavenly abyss survivors. The jade of the jade crystal array came from this. It could be said that it was precisely because of great sovereign Chang Yishuan's existence that the heavenly Yuan Empire had been able to survive through the darkest period of turmoil and the most torturous period of talent shortage. Great sovereign Chang Yishuan had played a major role in the heavenly Yuan Empire's survival until now. Thus, the surname Chang Yi had the same status as the imperial Zhan clan. In the base, people called Sir Chang Yihue by his name and not his surname to show respect. The current Chang Yihue was a third-class knight. Of course, he didn't have his ancestors' Devil Buster ability, but as long as the surname Chang Yi was in front of him, it had a natural intimidating power for a young soldier like Liang Lu. Not to mention that Chang Yihue was also in charge of the Dark Calm organization. He presided over the treatment and identification of the Sin poison infection. Zhan Zhao's fate today would most likely depend on Chang Yihue's final judgment. At this time, Liang Lu just wanted to lick back the words he spat out earlier. But the reality was that he couldn't do anything. He could only stand together with Luo Nan. He straightened his body, looked straight ahead, and assumed the most standard posture of a soldier. He waited for the reprimand that could come at any time, as well as the follow-up orders. And the reality was that Liang Lu had made the same mistake as Zhan Xiao. He had added too much drama to his mind. These big shots of the base had come over in groups. They absolutely didn't come to reprimand a few pawns. They came for Sir Shi Yuan, who had been called out by name. There was no follow-up after Liang Lu and Luo Nan's words of mockery. The group of people directly passed by Liang Lu and Luo Nan's position, and arrived before the area being protected and surveyed by the Dark Calm organization. Colonel Shang Zhan, who was a bit behind the two knights, couldn't escape the fate of being a busy person even at this time. He pointed at the air with his finger as he walked. He was most likely dealing with other matters. He didn't even turn his eyes in their direction. Luo Nan and Liang Lu watched helplessly as the group of big shots passed by and were treated as air. Luo Nan and Liang Lu, especially Liang Lu, didn't dare to move an inch until Lu Andy, who was part of the entourage, gave them a look that said, "Follow me." Only then did Luo Nan and Liang Lu quietly turn around and follow the group with their hearts in suspense. At this time, Zhan Xiao was unable to maintain his casual posture. He stood ramrod straight like Liang Lu and Luo Nan, separated by the isolated area. His posture did not change even though the two had been freed from their restraints.
Zhan Xiao was one of the mid-level officers of the base, so he had the qualifications to make the big shots look at him in the eye.
But his performance just now had more or less caused people to dislike him. Sir Shi Yuan didn't pay attention to him. He just lowered his head and conversed with Sir Chang Yihue.
The cold and sinister metal plate on the side of his face faintly warped along with his facial movements.
You guys aren't busy enough with logistics. You guys feel sorry for yourselves. You guys do counseling. You guys even have time for psychological treatment. Over at my place, a machine cannon can solve all your problems. If you have the strength to survive, Then you can toss and turn after the war. Let alone Zhang Xiao, who was right in front. Even Liang Lu, who had just blended into the group, straightened his body. His fair face flushed red once more. As for Luo Nan, he wasn't that sensitive. Or perhaps it could be said that this wasn't the area he was sensitive to. While Zhang Xiao and Liang Lu were feeling ashamed because of Sir Shi Yuan's evaluation, Luo Nan was a bit distracted. The direct reason for his distracted state was because he had followed the group closer to the isolated area where the incident had taken place. As he got closer, some minute details began to give him a faintly discernible stimulation. Luo Nan furrowed his brows. He was separated by layers upon layers of people in front of him, especially by Sir Shi Yuan's broad torso. Luo Nan's gaze and telepathic thoughts were cast in synchrony at the specific location where he had personally cut up. The big shots in the front row were in a different state. Chang Yihui didn't have any expression towards Shi Yuan's ridicule. He just nodded slightly in response. He opened his mouth to speak in the next moment, directly pulling back to the main topic. Seize the moment. Let's review the situation. The officer of the Dark Com administration, who was in charge of handling the scene, responded and stood up to report the situation. They, the members of the mission, all possessed specialized knowledge in this field. They also possessed rich experience in handling situations. How to report, how to find the key points, how to make suggestions, all of these had established procedures. It could be said that they were extremely familiar with it and flowed smoothly without any stumbling. The two knights just listened quietly most of the time. They would occasionally ask a question, and no matter what they heard, their faces didn't change in the slightest. Luo Nan was also within the group listening attentively. Since the reporting personnel of the Dark Com administration spoke quite a bit of specialized vocabulary, coupled with the problem of the chaos-style translation, Luo Nan could only listen to the general logic. He lacked the ability to comprehend the more practical and crucial data. Because of this, Luo Nan heard half of the report. Luo Nan clearly understood the basic conclusion that Officer Xiao suffered the backlash of the new time fortress structure. Officer Xiao was fully exposed in the twisted and evil environment. Officer Xiao was extremely close to the location of the incident. There was a high probability that he was directly responsible for the light pollution this time. Moreover, similar incidents might occur in the future. Luo Nan no longer bothered to understand the dry and dull data. His mind was completely focused on sensing the target area. As he poured his mind into it, a certain sense of disharmony continued to proliferate and magnify in his space of consciousness. Even though he didn't have the amplification of the standard array and lacked the assistance of the equipment. Luo Nan's brows furrowed tighter and tighter. It seemed like before. Luo Nan's emotions and thoughts churned, and his palms suddenly felt pain. He instinctively lowered his head to look and saw that the syncopator, which he had been studying and fiddling with since the beginning of the journey back, had triggered the activation command for some unknown reason. The syncopator had transformed from a chrysalis egg state into a mechanical ant. The sharp edges of the syncopator cut and stabbed fiercely into the tender flesh of Luo Nan's palm. Luo Nan's character in the game scene had basically restored his true cultivation. His fleshly body still had a bit of a foundation. His skin wasn't broken, only a short white scar was left behind. Right now, his flesh was slowly recovering to its normal color. But it was this scar that cut away the slight hesitation that arose in Luo Nan's heart due to his judgment. It allowed him to draw a definite conclusion. This isn't right. It's wrong. Luo Nan's thoughts were practically synchronized. Behind the two knights, Shi Yuan and Chang Yihui, was the broad-shouldered officer Shang Zhan. He used the shortest and most direct words to negate the overall results of the reporting officers of the Dark Com administration. This instantly drew the focus of practically everyone's gazes. If Luo Nan was an ordinary officer, Shang Zhan's response would undoubtedly be overstepping his authority and disregarding his superiors. But the problem lay in the fact that he had another identity in addition to his rank as an officer in the military. He was a master in both configuration and technique deployment. He could be promoted to the position of a master. In the Heavenly Yuan Empire, this was an illustrious position comparable to that of a second-class Star Lord. In the military, academic status would certainly give way to military rank. But in a domain like sinful poison, which required profound space-time configuration theory and technical support, even the highest officer of the relay station, Sir Yan Chi-Chu, would have to listen to Officer Shang Zhan's opinion with an open mind. Needless to say, whether it was Chang Yihui or Shi Yuan, They actually had a bit of tacit understanding and preparation in their hearts. Chang Yihui's face remained calm and collected.
He just leaned slightly to the side and spoke with a relatively gentle tone. If you have any opinions, Officer Sheng Zhan can raise them.
Sheng Zhan did not speak immediately. Instead, he used his thick fingers to light up one projection area after another in the air. It was like a demonstration board in a classroom. Looking at it, it was filled with densely packed formulas, numbers, and extremely complicated diagrams and sections. More than half of the people who came over were Sir Shi Yuan's guards. They were used to fighting on the battlefield and rolling on the front line. The moment they saw the cold structure of numbers, they felt like they had been kicked back to the dark time before the general education exam. They were panicking, breathless, and dizzy. They did not feel good at all. Only a few people such as Luanda showed great interest in these display boards. More people were looking at each other. Was this master's demeanor going to give a long speech? In this slight restlessness, Sheng Zhan lit up the final projection. It was surprisingly refreshing. It was just a standard timer interface. The precision was relatively high, and it could be accurate to 10,000ths of the basic time. Sheng Zhan confirmed the time through this interface. 2,136 seconds. As soon as his voice fell, a dazzling red light and an alarm came at the same time. Chapter 9-10. Nefarious poison contamination. Low intensity. Many people didn't even need to look at the display to roughly guess the meaning of the alarm. The overall atmosphere of the team fluctuated slightly. Some people whispered to each other, but overall, it was not as chaotic as when Colonel Sheng Zhan arranged the teaching display board. After all, everyone was already used to it. In the frontline bases that were engulfed in the flames of war and people were dying all the time, how could they expect the air to be clean and dust-free? Luo Nan was the most unaccustomed to this. According to the drill manual he had learned, he should be dealing with it now. However, no one moved at all, including the professionals from the Ming establishment. Everybody's eyes were wandering on the teaching board and the faces of the big shots, trying to find the key to the current situation.
It must be said that Luo Nan already had a grasp of the situation and judgment in his mind.
His understanding of the situation had already surpassed the vast majority of people present. Unfortunately, he was limited by his pitiful mathematical knowledge. Of course, there was a gap in the overall knowledge structure. Looking at these display boards was like reading a book from heaven. Even the most blunt inference method could not find any logical clues from them. For a moment, he was extremely vexed. On the other hand, Liang Lu, who was next to Luo Nan, was awakened from his stupefied state by this wave of alarm. He was barely able to shake off the shame of receiving a bad evaluation.
He was unable to calm his heart and observe the display board for the time being.
In his days, he only received the most stimulating information from the outside world. He even subconsciously looked for Luo Nan to converse. "This alarm sounds familiar," Luo Nan grunted softly. His gaze struggled free from the display board. He shifted his gaze along with Liang Lu to point at the alarm device. It was a piece of detection equipment placed beside the isolated area by the Netherworld Agency. Its working principle was the same as the detection module on the specialized maintenance vehicle, and the basic conclusion it obtained at this moment didn't seem to be any different. Really? Liang Lu was horrified. This area had clearly already been handled by him and Luo Nan. However, the warning this time was so similar that it was as if they had gone back in time. Didn't that mean that their previous work didn't work? Liang Lu's little heart skipped a beat. He turned his head to look at Luo Nan, but his scalp went numb before he could make eye contact with Luo Nan. He subconsciously turned his head, and he just so happened to meet Sheng Zhan's large bloodshot eyes. Liang Lu's heart was flustered, and his reaction was also wooden. Fortunately, Sheng Zhan only swept a glance over him, and Liang Lu didn't even catch the focus of his gaze. Then, Sheng Zhan said, "It's still the worker bee area 3321 to 3328. The low permeability type. The standard operation is divided into 17-05. The log shows that the last operation of Central Dimension 2 Patrol is in line with the program. The so-called Central Yanwei Patrol 2 was the abbreviation for the Central Pipeline and Safety Partition Area Extension Department Maintenance Post Patrol 2. In other words, it referred to the two people, Liang Lu and Luo Nan. In Shang Zhan's mouth, the work log that Liang Lu had painstakingly organized was skipped over by this sentence.
As for the more detailed part, it would probably occupy an inconspicuous corner of the complex data model that was currently ascending and descending. It might even be just one of the series of basic data. Even so, Liang Lu was very satisfied. No matter how small the positive feedback was, it was still positive. The impact of the negative reviews from before quietly dissipated a little. Luo Nan, who was next to him, could hear Luo Nan clearly. However, Luo Nan didn't pay too much attention to Liang Lu's mental state. He just stared blankly as he looked at the dense arrangement of teaching boards at the front of the line. He looked at the flashing and refreshing formulas, numbers, and graphics. Even if he could understand them, not 1 out of 100 could understand them. Liang Lu's whisper entered his ear. That person finally began to collect his mind and study this series of highly difficult mathematical models. He soon discovered an extraordinary situation. It's constantly refreshing? It wasn't just Liang Lu. Some other people who could vaguely make out what was going on found out one after another that the teaching exhibition board, which was already extremely complicated to begin with, was constantly being refreshed. Every piece of content was being refreshed at a different frequency. Each model seemed to be performing real-time calculations to mark out a certain type of rule changes. At this time, one could guess that there was certainly some sort of hidden yet unrevealed linkage logic between each board. The vast majority of people had already given up upon realizing this point. There were also some professionals who were extremely interested in this. They didn't want to give up, and they cast their gazes one after another toward Shang Zhan, who had lit up these teaching boards. They hoped that this person possessed a deep foundation in theory. He also possessed the demeanor of a master who had rich experience in teaching. He could dispel their doubts. They were destined to be disappointed. Obviously, Shang Zhan didn't think that the current environment was the kind of classroom where he could explain the profound in simple terms. He didn't have the intention of giving a long lecture, including this series of demonstrations. He didn't expect most people to understand. It was enough as long as the two knights who had decision-making power could understand. The two knights had indeed understood the key information. Shi Yuan's gaze lingered on the most conspicuous timing interface in the center. He briefly summarized, periodic changes? Shang Zhan confirmed, even if we deal with it now, it will appear again in 2 to 3 minutes. It should be the multiple elemental linkage of the new space-time fortress architecture. Of course, it also includes the increase and decrease of entropy within this near-closed system. Chang Yihui thought a little more and immediately asked, where does this rhythm of evolution come from? The rules of the evil environment shouldn't reflect obvious regularity. Here. Shang Zhan's finger pointed at the projection area on the left of the timer interface. The formula and numbers displayed on this projection did not seem much different from the other display boards. However, in the eyes of those who knew the ropes, it represented a very special meaning. The vast majority of the people in the surroundings could not understand it. Those who could understand it had more or less a change in expression. Luo Nan heard Liang Lu's extremely low inhalation of air between his lips and teeth before it was forcefully cut off. Shi Yuan and Chang Yihui's expressions were also very serious. Chang Yihui's duty was the most suitable to express his position. He didn't delay and spoke a few seconds later. I'll immediately report the relevant situation to Sir Tang. Given the current situation, I believe that everyone should meet to exchange opinions and respond to the following problems in a timely manner. The metal plate on Shi Yuan's cheek seemed to have frozen into his flesh. He didn't speak any further. He just nodded silently. Shang Zhan clenched his fist after the two knights reached a consensus. The densely packed display boards directly returned to nothingness, severing the last hope of certain people to listen to the lecture. Shang Zhan spoke to Chang Yihui at this time. We might need to make some major adjustments in the maintenance and repair work. Pull out some people. Chang Yihui declined to comment. He just said, we'll talk after we meet. Then he turned around and left with quick steps. The troops behind him split apart, forming a passageway for the few big shots to leave. A personal guard like Lu Andy naturally had to leave with Shi Yuan. Before he left, he even gestured to Liang Lu, Luo Nan, and Zhan Xiao, who had inexplicably gone from being the center of attention to being ignored. It could be considered a farewell. However, Luonan was able to see that a layer of haze had faintly accumulated on the peak of this mature and steady officer's brows.
Even his candid smile was unable to conceal it. Soon, the two knights and their entourage left without a trace. Luonan turned around and looked at the contaminated area that was beginning to be treated. So far, he could be considered to have come into close contact with the evil and poisonous environment. He felt the chaotic yet moving towards chaos, the internal irritation yet no obvious internal friction. But was he infected by Liang Lu with this inexplicable sense of familiarity? And at this time, Luonan heard Liang Lu murmur, "This is really bad."
Luonan nodded. "It really is bad."
Liang Lu was startled.
He raised his head to look at Luonan. "You know that model?
Do you learn it in the general level? If it's the one that Officer Shangzhan was referring to, then no." Luonan denied it. He really didn't know what the model was, but he followed his own logic in deducing forward. He picked out the details bit by bit, cross-verified them, and eliminated the correct options. The final remaining link, no matter how absurd it seemed in common sense, was definitely problematic. After experiencing the evil and poisonous environment up close, Luonan was able to deduce it from a more fundamental configuration theory. He had the confidence to conclude that he had executed the entire process from the discovery of the contaminated area to the cutting process. His judgment was accurate, and there were no mistakes at all. There were no problems with the link he led. Then the problem was not with the part that belonged to him. Yes, Luonan was referring to the blessing of cleaning and patching after the cutting process was completed. The problem was the jade crystal array. Liang Lu was unable to grasp Luonan's reasoning for a time, but he didn't have the mood to delve into it. In reality, he just had a deep impression of the data model of the jade crystal array. He forcefully guessed it from the words and actions of Officer Shangzhan and the others. His train of thought was far from being clear. His train of thought was simply cut off by Luonan's interruption. He circled back. "What's going on? Is it a malfunction, or?" "It's the contamination." The one who spoke was Zhan Xiao. And right now, he was surrounded by the members of the Jingming agency. He crossed the quarantine area and walked to the vicinity of Luonan and Liang Lu. Perhaps it was the opposite of what happened when things reached an extreme. This member of the imperial family had suffered from a bad evaluation and neglect within a short few minutes. Not only did he not collapse, but he seemed to have calmed down quite a bit. Of course, this didn't mean that he was free. He still had to go to the relevant department to undergo a series of tests and inquiries. The surrounding personnel were simply monitoring and escorting him. Zhan Zhao's footsteps didn't stop. He didn't even turn his head when he spoke his second sentence. "I only understood what that fellow did after Officer Shang pointed it out. He twisted the sewage pipe and the drinking water pipe together." Zhan Zhao's analogy wasn't accurate, but it was helpful in understanding. Liang Lu, who was originally confused, vaguely understood. He was even more astonished. Does he want to be court-martialed with this godly operation? I don't know if he'll be court-martialed or not, but everyone knows that the next few days are bound to be terrible. Chapter 9-11. At least one of Liang Lu, Luonan, and Zhan Zhao's mouths had been blessed. With the prediction of the situation still ringing in their ears, after a brief meeting, the base's military resolution team announced that the relay station was executing a Level 2 pollution response and entering a state of emergency. In accordance with the standard of falling into the medium-level evil poison contamination area, the various drill rules and regulations were strictly implemented. Don't be fooled by the word strict hanging on the announcement. From Luonan's perspective, the drill rules and regulations he had learned some time ago would have to be abolished by at least half if they were to be implemented according to the new rules. The feeling it gave people was that of a dust-free electronic workshop, where every cubic meter of air contained specks of dust, had a sudden change in style. It had become a steel mill with surging heat waves and flowing molten iron. At the same time, the worker bees within the 3 hives cancelled all rest and rearranged their positions. They were required to familiarize themselves with their new jobs in the shortest amount of time possible and enter a state of mind. The so-called rearrangement was done in accordance with Shangzhan's suggestion to Changyi Hui. Substantially reduce the number of people in charge of daily maintenance at the base and fill them up with direct production positions.
The direct result of this adjustment was that all the maintenance soldiers became the busiest group of people in the logistics department in a single leap. There was no one else. While their former colleagues were scrambling to adapt to their new production positions, Liang Lu and Luo Nan, who remained in their original positions, needed to be in charge of a maintenance area several times larger than before. For example, the previous second patrol team for the maintenance of the central pipeline and safety partition area extension had now become the maintenance team for the global pipeline extension area. It had been merged with two other personnel of the same post into a large team, and it was led by a senior lieutenant. However, the area of responsibility had increased by more than 10 times. Under these circumstances, if they were to strictly follow the routine drill rules and carry out maintenance tasks, they would need to chop 2 people into 10 pieces, 20 pieces, and then blow a mouthful of immortal energy to form a clone. Only then would they be able to meet the basic requirements. Under the pressure of reality, they were bound to give up some things. Full Yenwei Division 2 has discovered a low-pollution area. Coordinates. Don't waste time. Just stare at the pipelines, equipment, and maintenance machines. Don't pay attention to anything else. Even if the living evil poison reaches the tip of your nose, pretend you don't see it as long as it doesn't eat you. Roger that. Liang Lu hung up the call in a straightforward and efficient manner. He curled his lips and indicated for Luo Nan to drive the specialized maintenance vehicle. The vehicle ran straight through the middle of the area labeled as low-intensity pollution. As for the alarms that were still flashing incessantly, Seiji only needed to punch them with his fist. No, he needed to adjust the alarm level and the alarm would stop flashing. Look, on the command deck of the Beehive, the stress of dispatching over the past 2 days has fried a lot of people's brains. The odds of us running into gibberish have significantly increased, too. Luo Nan's eyebrows unconsciously twitched twice as the specialized maintenance vehicle buzzed through the polluted area as they spoke. The intricate and detailed mental senses interweaved with the deep impression of the drill manual's requirements. This was more or less a type of torture for a patient with mild obsessive-compulsive disorder. Liang Lu mentally prepared him with the tone of an experienced person. Now, don't think of the base as a base. You can close your eyes and imagine a military stronghold that was built before the world of sin and was later abandoned. Now it is completely abandoned. Only mutant species that grew up in the evil environment will occasionally pass by. That's basically what a moderately polluted area means. What we're doing now, you can just treat it as field work. Even the logistics personnel will occasionally have the opportunity to go out into the field. This is a rehearsal ahead of time. Luo Nan laughed, and Liang Lu laughed as well. He punched the control panel of the vehicle again. Who would have thought that a problem would occur with the jade crystal array? It's all that self-righteous wicked thing's fault. Luo Nan, who was given the title of Wicked Thing, had a smile that collapsed a bit. Luckily, Liang Lu didn't notice. He just sighed. Honestly speaking, our luck is far too bad. The follow-up treatment is quite troublesome after staying in this environment for too long. But it's fine. We're fully reimbursed. We don't need to worry about the cost. It was hard for Luo Nan to imagine the situation outside of the game setting. But through his observations during this period of time, he discovered that the citizens of Heavenly Abyss of the Hongguang system had a contradictory attitude toward the evil poison. Of course they knew that the evil poison pollution was a very troublesome matter. Otherwise, Zhang Zhao's mentality wouldn't have nearly collapsed. The early stages of the world of sin calamity also wouldn't have so many tragic cases that made people feel suffocated. But the evil poison pollution was a problem that the people of the Hongguang system had to come into contact with, face and endure. No one lived in a vacuum, let alone a vacuum that couldn't block the pollution and infiltration of the evil poison environmental rules. Therefore, in the face of such a terrible situation, everyone in the relay station, be it the knights, the colonels, the sergeants, or the privates, all displayed a kind of calmness, as though they had given up. The evil poison was truly disgusting. Well, since they had already splashed it all over their bodies, then so be it. Of course, the evil poison pollution would have repercussions, and it would be very serious. There were over 10,000 soldiers in the base. Don't look at how each and every one of them was alive and kicking right now. After the war, they would have to pay a huge price for treatment. Even if the expenses were reimbursed, the treatment was bound to drag on for a long time. Variables would crop up everywhere. But so what? Everyone is forced to do so.
Since the beginning of the World of Sin calamity, the public version of the Empire's internal cultivation and law deployment has been updated practically every 30 years. After several hundred versions, it has long since changed beyond recognition when compared to the current one. Why? Liang Lu used his chin to point at Luo Nan as he asked this question. But he didn't expect Luo Nan to answer at all. He continued speaking, key techniques like internal cultivation and law deployment have been tempered over and over again. How many years have passed before they have accumulated their essence? They are the results of basic research done to the extreme. But how can basic research be broken through that easily? One iteration every 30 years.
If one could have this kind of speed of progress, then the godly kingdom of the heavens would have to crawl on the ground and call them daddy.
In the end, everyone has been living in the evil poison environment for a long time. They have been polluted and mutated by the environmental rules. They have no choice but to do this.
Perhaps in a few hundred years, a few thousand years, people like us will be a completely different species from our ancestors even though we still retain our historical memories. We will be forced into a different evolutionary direction by the evil poison.
Hey, did I say a bit too much? I didn't scare you, did I?
Luo Nan answered honestly. Not at the moment.
Oh, you're that courageous?
Our situation this time won't be worse than the one Captain Lu faced in the war to defend the ancestral domain back then. Liang Lu was startled for a moment, then he laughed out loud. That's the right way to think. The car slowed down on its own in the middle of his happiness. A large bionic device in the shape of an insect lay quietly within the pipeline tunnel approximately 50 meters in front of them.
The 6 limbs spread out symmetrically.
Each limb was as thick as an arm, but compared to the curved main cabin that was the size of a train carriage, they still appeared slender. As a result, when they propped themselves up at the bottom of the tunnel, they felt soft and powerless.
Chapter 9:12.
When they got closer, they were able to see that the enormous mechanical insect in front of them was nearly filled to the brim with pipelines. There were hundreds and thousands of larvae wriggling and undulating beneath its slender limbs. Some of them even flew up in the air, climbing to higher areas of the limbs.
They moved in sequence and flowed ceaselessly.
Oh!
Liang Lu instantly exposed a few small details that contradicted his identity as an experienced person, but no one cared about this right now. The specialized maintenance vehicle continued to move forward.
They got a bit closer, and the sparks that occasionally lit up between the larvae and the limbs allowed the two to see even more details.
There were protrusions on top of the 6 limbs, and every protrusion was a special workstation that could accommodate 1 or 2 people. There were roughly 100 of them, but not even a tenth of them were in a working state right now. And the so-called larvae were actually all sorts of self-propelled maintenance robots. They would be driven by commands to move over if they were damaged, or if they needed to change their mounting tools. They would automatically divert between the limbs and the abdomen of this mechanical insect to complete the task of repair and replacement. TSK. The Earth Layer Patroller is a mid-sized mobile repair station. I never thought that I would actually need to use this big fellow for outdoor work. Luo Nan sized up the so-called repair station from head to toe. Its main body, excluding the limbs, was approximately 20 meters long. The widest part of its carapace-shaped body was at least 8 meters, and its height could reach approximately 6 meters. If the appearance of the limbs was taken into account, it would appear even more expansive. It looks bulky, but its structure can actually be shrunk. When it's finished, it can even use the spatial point-to-point permeation technique to warp the rock strata, allowing it to run extremely fast underground. Luo Nan couldn't help but let out a wow. He was quite fascinated. The only unfortunate thing was that this was the first time this special piece of equipment appeared, and it didn't feel particularly easy. The number of larvae under its abdomen was truly a bit too many. There were several hundred to 1,000 pieces of machinery and equipment waiting to be repaired. It would have been fine if there were 100 workstations. But there were less than 10 workstations on the 6 limbs. It was hard to avoid a bit of trouble dealing with all of them. So much so that the entire repair team became quite bloated. Just how much work has been accumulated here? No wonder they asked us to come and help. Liang Lu looked at this scene in detail. He was a bit apprehensive in his heart, but he had to put on a calm and collected appearance in front of Luo Nan. This is pretty good. Compared to the assembly line, this kind of position is more tempering. While they were talking, the maintenance vehicle was already approaching the tail of the soil patroller. After the signal connection was completed, a hole automatically opened in the area for the maintenance vehicle to enter and exit. However, the soil patroller's abdomen was filled with machinery waiting to be repaired, and the direction of the machinery's flow was also fixed. As the driver, Luo Nan switched to maglev mode under the suggestion of the AI in order to avoid interfering with the already excessively bloated queue. The body of the car floated in the air, passing over the lava that covered the ground and gliding toward the opening. Liang Lu was still working hard to fulfill his duty as the commanding officer of the army. He stimulated Luo Nan's desire for victory. We can have a maintenance competition. Whoever loses will go find Zhang Xiao and get that out of print. Rumble. The sound of an explosion suddenly came. Actually, the first thing the two felt was the shock wave that directly oppressed and warped the air. It came crushing over from the side and front. So much so that they were unable to distinguish the following explosion. Was it a simple stimulation to their eardrums, or was it a vicious blow to their faces? Then their concussed brains gave off a signal of protest. Liang Lu was completely unprepared. His mind went blank, and the world spun around him. If it weren't for the flexible seatbelt's automatic restraint, he would have been flung a dozen meters away by the roofless maintenance vehicle. Not just him. Even the maintenance vehicle that weighed more than 2 tons had its magnetic track restraint between it and the soil patrol forcibly broken under the impact that came without any warning. The body of the vehicle was clearly offset, and under the effect of the intermittent magnetic force, it swayed in the air like a heavy leaf before it smashed into the external armor layer at the edge of the entrance. There was no telling how thick it was. In the end, Liang Lu had undergone sudden impact training. It only took him 0.02 of a second to 3 breaths of time before he was jolted awake by the dual warnings from himself and the 2 AI in the maintenance vehicle. He didn't even have time to warn Luo Nan. He directly used his authority as a commanding officer to take back control of the maintenance vehicle and perform manual emergency evasion. But he was actually unable to take it back. Determination passed. Magnetic track correction complete. Preparing for collision. Mother ****. Liang Lu couldn't hold back from cursing. His final chance to adjust had already passed by the time his curses left his mouth. The flexible seatbelt had already bound him firmly to his seat, and the maintenance vehicle he was riding in had turned into a card that was flung out diagonally. It spun, scraped the edge of the metal at the edge of the entrance, and smashed into it with a whoosh. First, there was a clear clang sound of impact. It seemed to have been caught somewhere, and the entire body of the train flipped sideways. Before it had completely flipped over, the strong magnetic restraint gathered again, and the train made a surfing-like roll and returned to its original position. Then Liang Lu saw and experienced it. The maintenance vehicle smashed into the magnetic restraint ring. It was like a crazed beast that had been shot with a tranquilizer gun. It smashed forward in the narrow passageway. It smashed into the left wall, smashed into the right wall, smashed into the ceiling, and smashed into the floor. After 7 or 8 consecutive smashes, it finally digested the inertial force and came to a stop in disorder. Rumble! Another muffled sonic boom rang in his ears. The vehicle and his body bounced once more. Liang Lu subconsciously curled up his body into a defensive position before he came to a realization. This time, the entire Earth layer patroller was rocking. The second sonic boom was the same as the shockwave that nearly caused the car accident. It was just that they had entered the stomach of the Earth layer patroller. There was an additional layer of filtering buffer, so it wasn't that uncomfortable. This was... The fantasy breed servant army outside had begun a large-scale attack. They had really made it at the right time. Liang Lu finally came to his senses. He turned his head to look. Luo Nan, are you okay? Luo Nan was also firmly tied to his seat, but his hands were still propped up against the driver's seat sensor area. His arms were a bit stiff. Liang Lu was worried that his defensive posture wasn't in place and that his bones would be broken by the collision from the tumbling just now. I'm fine. Luo Nan's voice was still stable. His hands moved away from the sensor area, and at the same time, the two's flexible seatbelts automatically loosened, restoring their freedom. Liang Lu let out a long sigh. His scalp tightened. In that situation just now, if they really collided, it wouldn't be fatal. However, they would injure their muscles and bones, and they would be sent to the battlefield hospital. If this was the result of their first new mission, they wouldn't be able to raise their faces before the end of this battle. Liang Lu remembered something else when he thought of this. He pulled up the operation records of the special maintenance vehicle without a second thought. Even so, it was more daunting than dangerous, but he just couldn't understand why he didn't take back the control authority when he used his commanding officer authority. The last operation. Luo Nan? Yes, Gongshi? Luo Nan responded. Liang Lu looked at the confused expression of his only subordinate soldier. His own mind was even more confused. What kind of operation is this? He saw that. No, that set of records showed that Luo Nan had promptly switched to manual mode the instant the special maintenance vehicle was detached from the magnetic track. He completed as many as 22 operations within a thousandth of a second. He forcefully completed the manual docking of the vehicle and the magnetic track, as well as the trajectory adjustment. It was this series of operations that helped the AI complete the most critical judgment of the situation. It allowed everything to return to the right track. Liang Lu only reacted in the latter half of this time frame. He attempted to take over the authority, but the AI had already determined the correctness of the previous set of operations. It gave Luo Nan more weight in the operations, and this caused Liang Lu's control to become ineffective. Basically, there were no mistakes in the logic. But how did Luo Nan enter and execute the 22 operation commands in the blink of an eye? Just how fast did his consciousness rotate in that instant? The operation records were drawn, right? Luo Nan looked at the records and was a bit baffled. I didn't do that much. Someone followed up just as the conversation began. What kind of operation? To put it nicely, it's an extreme operation. But to put it bluntly, it's an operation that scrapes the edge. It's an operation that's just a hair away from violating the rules. The answer to Liang Lu's doubt was a hoarse voice that suddenly appeared, sounding a little weak. The two people in the car looked in the direction of the voice. This was already the end of the passageway. It just so happened to be a parking area. Two similar maintenance vehicles were parked there, as well as some other means of transportation. But no one could be seen. Liang Lu and Luo Nan didn't dare to tarry. They happened to jump out of the car at the same time by chance. They stood ramrod straight and announced in a loud voice, "Second-rank public officer Liang Lu, Private Luo Nan, has come under orders to report." It was still the same hoarse voice. He spoke powerlessly. "You can see it. I'm your direct subordinate officer, Go Yi. If you have the time to talk nonsense, come over and help your officer up." Huh. The two looked at each other in dismay. Luo Nan's reaction was a bit faster. His line of sight shifted and he saw a shadow that didn't quite fit in between the two parked maintenance vehicles. After confirming the suspicious range, they focused their analysis. The two went, "Oh no!" and ran forward together. They tried to lift up the person who was sandwiched between the two vehicles. But Luo Nan was stupefied when he just touched the edge. The current situation of this Lieutenant Go Yi really wasn't suitable for many people to use their strength. This was because this person's limbs were all severed from the shoulder to the hip. Moreover, he didn't have prosthetics installed. He had the appearance of a severe disability that was completely unable to take care of himself. Liang Lu was still able to recognize this person. He called out Lieutenant Go once more and carefully lifted him up, placing him on the side of the car. "You've never seen a disabled person before, huh? Then do you know that this disabled person just helped you out?" Lieutenant Go Yi was clearly already used to Luo Nan's current gaze. He had an indifferent expression, still full of the air of an officer. "If I wasn't here, I wouldn't have used my only leg to adjust the magnetic orbit. You, Private Luo Nan, would have had to perform at least 50 instantaneous operations. That would be a completely illegal act of mental interference. I could immediately kick you back to 2 Hive. Chapter 9:13. What could Luo Nan say? He could only straighten his body and respond in a loud voice. Liang Lu, who was still supporting Go Yi, opened his mouth in an attempt to plead leniency for Luo Nan. But before he could speak, Go Ye's round face, which didn't have much dignity to it, turned around. His lips curled into a sneer. "And you? Operational records? You still have the face to look at operational records, huh? Large amounts of instantaneous operational records that defied common sense. You should immediately think of the mutual interference that directly acted upon the configuration frame of the equipment. But you're still confused even now. Is he the commanding officer, or is he the corpse collection squad?
There was nothing to say. Liang Lu and Luo Nan could only raise their voices a second time. Yes, Captain. Just a few words back and forth, another wave of shock came, and the roaring sound suppressed the voices of Luo and Liang.
As for Go Yi, his butt hung on the edge of the maintenance vehicle. He swayed back and forth.
He really couldn't gather his breath. In the end, he could only glare at Luo Nan. My leg.
Ah! Yes. Luo Nan could still be saved. He turned his head and searched by relying on Go Ye's explanation. Soon, he found the target that was tossed near the emergency control console at the entrance of the magnetic tracks. He jogged to a distance of 7 or 8 meters and picked up the leg prosthesis. There was even a pair of military pants hanging outside. During this time, Go Yi raised his eyebrows and asked Liang Lu for confirmation. Fish egg. Liang Lu grinned. It could be considered an apologetic smile, but in the end, he still answered very seriously. Naturalized seed. Outstanding talent. Stable operation. 0 mistakes to this day. Regular operation is very stable. But once you exceed the scope and need to display your abilities freely, the nature of the fish egg will be exposed. Go Yi watched Luo Nan return and declined Luo Nan's offer to help install the prosthesis. His smooth and round body dropped down and the suction cup on his left hip latched onto the prosthesis. In this way, this person had become a left leg prosthesis. He could move freely. He was a disabled person. Luo Nan was a bit curious. After all, there were far too few people in a situation like Go Ye's in the front line zone of the relay station. Captain Go Ye didn't care about these gazes, but he was unwilling to stay here any longer. Let's go. It's better to talk about some things inside. As he spoke, he took the lead in moving his single-legged prosthesis. The exposed bionic toe joints were like 2 short legs, driving the entire body forward at a speed that normal people couldn't reach. It was fast and steady, as if he was gliding along the ground. It was fine to look at the overall situation, but it was rather comical to look at it in detail. However, what Luo Nan saw was how Lieutenant Go Yi utilized the prosthetic structure to complete functions that were absolutely impossible to preset. To put it bluntly, this was also an example of spiritual interference with a mechanical configuration. It was just that Lieutenant Go Yi had used the dynamo core to guide him from start to finish, completely adhering to the operating specifications. Perhaps, this was a state of doing as one pleases without breaking the rules. Luo Nan watched with rapt attention, so much so that Liang Lu was afraid that Luo Nan would be rude. Liang Lu poked Luo Nan in the dark to serve as a reminder. It was as if Go Yi had eyes in the back of his head. He went, "Hey," at this time. No need to make a fuss about nothing. I'm just an unlucky bastard who got screwed over by a certain long-range designer. Actually, I'm quite mighty normally, but the dozen or so multifunctional arms I use have all developed contamination deviations. All of them have been melted down. If this wasn't the case, I wouldn't be guarding this bug as a supervisor. I'd be on the production line this morning. Liang Lu glared at Luo Nan, and Luo Nan lowered his head in apology. Go Yi turned his head. But you, Luo Nan, right? Yes, Lieutenant. I see that you don't have any misgivings with your interference configuration framework. It looks like you've been doing design for a long time. You're not the same as this miscellaneous trash next to you. Why didn't you stay in the 2 hive and make use of your talents? Luo Nan was quite happy to receive such an evaluation from Lieutenant Go Yi, who had quite the professional air about him. But he didn't know why, so he could only look at Liang Lu. Liang Lu was quite dissatisfied with the evaluation of miscellaneous trash. But Lieutenant Go Yi wasn't like Zhang Xiao or Lu Andy, who he was familiar with. Within the military system, where ranks were clearly distinguished, Liang Lu could only listen. He received Luo Nan's pleading gaze, so he spoke honestly. Reporting to Lieutenant. We are the recruit squad. According to the latest requirements, we have all been transferred to the frontline maintenance department. Frontline? What kind of frontline is this? However, recruits really should see the world. Otherwise, they won't be unable to differentiate frontline from second line. Go Yi laughed out loud. Right now,
The three of them had already followed the internal passageway and entered the central control room of the Earth Layer Patroller. The equipment here was densely arranged, and the space was extremely narrow. It was so small that it was almost stingy. Clearly, the Earth Layer Patroller had quite a bit of space to use. Go Yi saw Luo Nan's doubts and took the initiative to explain. This is for the sake of shrinking and escaping in a state of emergency. I'll give you guys a word of advice first. If you have the chance to truly go to the front lines, don't leave your workstations and wander around. Every year, the idiots who get squeezed to death when the bug transforms can at least form a squad the size of ours. Luo Nan could only agree. Go Yi stood in front of these complex equipment. He had lost both his arms, but he was able to communicate with the control panel through his mechanical toes. He was still able to realize efficient operations. He fiddled with the equipment as he explained the situation to the two of them. You guys came at a bad time. Well, it's quite a coincidence. Long-range attacks have just been restored outside. Even though the magnetite mica jellyfish's energy-siphoning tentacles have been restrained by the new version of the Time Fortress, the forceful smashing of the magnetite spirit hammer is quite intimidating. The various equipment in the base aren't suited to the new structure to begin with. Right now, a large amount of them have been destroyed by interference. Repairing them is quite torturous. The task is arduous. It's much more tiring than taking a stroll in the Two Honeycombs pipeline tunnel. Luo Nan and Liang Lu's work in the central pipeline tunnel wasn't as simple as taking a stroll. But since the officer had said this, they had nothing to refute. They listened to Go Ye's explanation seriously. Although Lieutenant Go Yi had a foul mouth, he wasn't a harsh person. Towards the two recruits who clearly lacked experience, his words could be said to be earnest and well-intentioned. Don't be afraid of being tired. Being tired is the best state you can be in here. If you're not tired, then you're dead. In the past, the scope of your work stopped at the safety partition area. I know that you've been cursing that long-range designer all this time, but you've always been under the protection of the core plane and the space-time fortress that he repaired. But right now, your work area has already extended out of the core plane. You've reached planet Vanguard 4. 400 meters up from here is the surface positions shield generator. Push forward another kilometer, and you'll reach the frontline array. Speaking of which, do you really think that the entire repair team is relying on these big bugs to be repairmen here? Luo Nan and Liang Lu could only shake their heads. And Luo Nan's thoughts went even further. So this was what Lieutenant Go Yi meant when he spoke of a long-range designer? Well, this was probably the official identity that the Innerverse simulator had arranged for his predecessor. In any case, it sounded much better than a self-righteous, wicked plaything. Lieutenant Go Yi was quite satisfied with the obedient attitudes of the two rookies. He didn't even turn his head as he continued to speak. For the repair team, the area of responsibility extends to wherever the pipeline extends. Work is no longer about nitpicking and finding trouble for nothing. Instead, it is about solving practical life-threatening problems. Right now, the repair team has a full complement of 20 people. There are only 11 people here on the big bug side, including you two. The other 9 people are going to deal with emergency situations according to the needs of the front lines. While I'm speaking, there might be some unlucky bastard who directly faces the assault of a fantasy breed and his servant army. He might even be dead by now. Luo Nan and Liang Lu glanced at each other. They were both speechless. Lieutenant Go Ye's mouth really had no taboo. He didn't care what the two rookies thought. He directly brought up the structural diagram of the Earth Layer Patroller, indicating for the two to see and remember it clearly. We're currently short on manpower. We have a full complement of 84 classified workstations. Only 8 have been activated. The flow isn't too smooth. You two must take up your responsibilities as soon as possible. Station 4, I'm talking about this appendage. The lower workstation 4 to 92, it's yours. I can give you half an hour to get used to it. Seeing Lieutenant Go Ye's assignment, Liang Lu blurted out, the two of us will share a workstation. Aha! Lieutenant Go Yi confirmed as if it was a matter of course. The two of you will share a workstation. Isn't there a shortage of manpower? Strictly speaking, recruits aren't part of the manpower list before they are proven to be useful. Don't worry. I won't give you two a test to take charge of an area for now. Liang Lu's eyes went wide. But we.
Lieutenant Go Yi twisted his face to look at him. Officer Liang Lu, the lowest rank in every workstation right now is Sergeant Major. Who gave you the courage to compare yourself with them before you've even entered the post? Yes, Lieutenant. Liang Lu's voice quickly weakened. Lieutenant Go Yi didn't seem to be truly angry. His tone didn't change at all. If nothing unexpected happens, we'll be traveling the entire base on the back of this big bug. But since this is a battlefield, accidents are normal. As I said just now, there may be people going on missions at any time. There may also be people dying. You too must have the ability to take charge of a workstation by yourself during this period of time. The faster the better. Of course, it's best if you possess the ability to take charge of an area. If there really is trouble, you too will be needed. Don't say stupid things like, "I'll fight with my life on the line." What the frontline soldiers need are solid equipment, reliable pipelines, and thick armor. These are achieved by relying on solid technology and abundant logistical supplies. Without these, no one would care even if you stuffed your own flesh and blood inside.
No matter what Liang Lu and Luo Nan were thinking in their hearts, they were good soldiers who unconditionally carried out orders on the surface. They puffed out their chests at the same time, and it was unknown how many times they made the standard response. "Yes, Lieutenant."
Go Yi turned around. He placed one foot on the ground, and his butt leaned against the control panel. He used this strange and unruly posture to face the two rookies. "That's all. You two can go to your workstations." "All right, the damaged magnetic track and the repair vehicle are all your jobs. Don't forget to fix them before you start work." Chapter 9:14. Beep. Activity Source 6 to 23 is diverted. Egg Host B Comprehensive Repair Station 1. Mother-Child Type. Requesting replenishment of the liquid metal mechanical model and the original chip. Also requesting replacement of the internal factory module. Luo Nan twisted his neck. The soundproof earmuffs automatically turned on the response switch. Lower workstation 4 to 92 received. Spare parts for the liquid metal mechanical model and the internal factory module. Requesting 2 base numbers of the original chip. Received. Automatically updating the data of the spare parts requested. Request approved. The spare parts have entered the cargo corridor. Luo Nan didn't waste any time in communicating with the AI.
He continued to bury his head in researching the work in his hands.
30 syncopators were like 30 flying ants. They surrounded the component clamped in his hands, moving up and down as they shuttled back and forth. The visible trajectory and the invisible but even more rigorous and beautiful configuration contours converged in the void. Luo Nan was in the middle of earnestly observing and understanding when he was jabbed in the shoulder. His train of thought was nearly interrupted. He raised his head and saw Liang Lu at the side. Liang Lu extended his hand to indicate for him to look at the flickering light and shadow icon on the transparent isolation cover in front of the workstation. The current Luo Nan couldn't be mentioned in the same breath as when he muddle-headedly participated in the offline test. He soon found his target from the dazzling visual data. Spare parts loss rate. 4%. Spare parts application rate. 100%. Spare parts module usage. 77 base numbers. Spare parts reuse rate. 31%. Lower workstation ranking, 1. Luo Nan went, "Oh." He understood Liang Lu's meaning. This meant that their group of workstations was ranked first among the 3 lower workstations out of the 8 workstations that the Soil Patrol was currently working at, based on their total work volume, work quality, work efficiency, sustainability, and other factors. Worthy of praise. Continue to work hard. Luo Nan grinned, accepting the encouragement from his superior. Then he lowered his head once more and continued with his previous work. Luo Nan's consciousness worked, and the configuration design of the handheld component gradually appeared within the notebook space of the auxiliary AI. It also appeared in the virtual work area in front of him. It was compared with the original data in the base's database. Luo Nan paid attention to the real thing aside from comparing the data. It wasn't just the one in his hand, but also the workstation he was at. A new disassembled component appeared. That's right. The 6 limbs that the Soil Patroller extended were not just to arrange the workstations. At the very end and at the very bottom was an automatic maintenance node. When the self-propelled equipment that needed to be repaired gathered here, some of the common and relatively simple faults were directly solved at the automatic maintenance node. If the system determined that it could not be repaired automatically, it would be handed over to the various workstations for disposal. In addition to this, there was another situation. Some equipment that had been determined to have no value to repair would be dismantled at the automatic maintenance node. The enormous noise that forced Luo Nan to wear his soundproof earmuffs came from this. Under the intervention of artificial intelligence, the automatic maintenance node would retain the reusable components, reclassify, refurbish, and transport them to the parts warehouse of each workstation for second use. Just now, Liang Lu had pointed out a series of statistics in this area. Such a setup could greatly improve the sustainable utilization of equipment resources. It was even more valuable in field operations. It was just that Luo Nan wasn't interested in the work of reusing parts. It was the same even if his workstation's relevant data was among the best. All he cared about was how to restore the configuration design to the greatest extent possible in a specific system for a specific component. So he didn't hesitate to expend his mental energy to restore the configuration design of all the parts, facilities, and equipment that had passed through his hands. This was to gain a deeper understanding of the overall train of thought and considerations of the product designer. He traced back to the source and sought for a thorough understanding. For a maintenance personnel, engaging in this sort of reconstruction research was a waste of time under the premise that they already possessed detailed basic information. But who asked Luo Nan's two-person workstation to be in such a special situation? Poof! Luo Nan was once again called out by his superior. It was a bit strange. Wasn't it Liang Lu's working time right now? The host Egg B was the most common and highly modular self-propelled comprehensive repair station. They had already repaired no less than 40 of them in the past few days. Aside from the first few that needed to be gnawed on because they weren't too familiar with the situation, they should have been repaired with their eyes closed. He asked through the communications device of his soundproof earmuffs, "Officer, is there a problem?" Liang Lu didn't respond. Instead, he straightened his back in his seat a second ago. He used an incomparably proper posture to speak loudly. In his nervousness and haste, he actually forgot to turn on his communications device. Of course, Luo Nan couldn't hear a thing. But Luo Nan wasn't an idiot. How could he not understand what was going on when he saw Liang Lu's posture? He immediately gave up on the wasteful activity in his hands and turned off the soundproof function of his earmuffs. He sat up straight like Liang Lu and reported amidst the deafening rumbling and vibrations of the outside world. "Hello, Lieutenant." The current Luo Nan was becoming more and more like a native of the Hongguang galaxy. He was already used to restraining his mental senses to avoid being exposed to the polluted environment. But because of this, he became sluggish. He didn't even notice that someone had walked up behind him. Oh, Liang Lu said that the military had a few sensing methods built upon the foundation of using the dynamo core. Though they weren't as comprehensive and specific as mental senses, they were extremely sharp and incisive. He had to learn them no matter what. Luo Nan entered a state of introspection and was a bit distracted. Fortunately, Lieutenant Go Yi, who had suddenly arrived between the two of them. He just looked at the visual data on the isolation barrier. He didn't mind their attitude and reactions. Liang Lu tilted his head slightly and winked at Luo Nan. Then he directly threw himself into the work of repairs that was in full swing. The workstation was like a battlefield. Even if the hierarchy was strict, unnecessary etiquette could be dispensed with in a working state. So Liang Lu was confident and in the right when he threw the blame to Lieutenant Go Yi. As for Luo Nan, who was unfortunately in an idle state, he needed to face Lieutenant Go Ye's interrogation during his post-patrol. Go Yi still had the image of a cripple who supported himself with one leg. It would be very hard for him to complete the overly complex operations if he were to personally do the work. But his considerable standard and abundant experience in the professional field allowed him to possess the qualifications and ability to instruct all the maintenance soldiers on the Earth Layer Patroller. 77 base units. Based on the calculation of 20 equipment for each base unit, your efficiency these past 2 days is pretty good. Luo Nan had forcefully translated the unit of time in the Heavenly Yuan Empire into the level of day. It was only about 14 hours. 2 days was about 28 hours. Luo Nan had handled 1,500 pieces of equipment during this time, and his success rate was considerable. With this foundation, Luo Nan accepted Go Ye's evaluation with a clear conscience. Thank you, Lieutenant. Yesterday at this time, the spare parts recycling rate on your workstations was only 7%. Now it has already soared to over 30%. You're living quite frugally. Have you considered the failure rate? Chapter 9:15. Luo Nan really hadn't considered it. He used the syncopator to analyze the configuration, and then dissected the design using the idea of configuration design. Then he saw where he could use it. Of course, he used it immediately. As for the follow-up, he didn't think too much about it. Besides, didn't they all pass the systems inspection? Is there a law that prohibits me from doing that? Luo Nan was a bit confused. However, Go Yi didn't criticize him either. He only moved forward a short distance, and the only available mechanical prosthesis was connected to the control panel of the workstation. With great familiarity, he brought up a series of data, which was the tracking information of all the equipment that had undergone repair procedures at this workstation. This kind of high-level data was still an important judgment basis for the merit evaluation of maintenance positions. Luo Nan didn't have the authority to retrieve it, so he never understood it. He was somewhat curious and took the opportunity to satisfy his curiosity. However, the efficiency of his naked eyes compared to Go Ye's reading speed with the dynamo core was worlds apart. Go Ye finished reading hundreds of thousands of pieces of information in the span of a breath. Soon, the basic data interface disappeared. Go Ye mumbled a few keywords. Self-handling missions. Not bad. Battle loss rate. Meaningless. Second failure rate 7.1%. Average. Hee not bad. As Go Ye's mouth opened and closed, a portion of the key data visualized chart structure appeared within the isolation barrier. He had already done a certain degree of data analysis during this time, allowing the work results of Luo Nan and Liang Lu's workstations to appear more clearly. What should be done has been done. What should be done has been done. What should be done has been done. He's completely following the drill manual. What a good child. Luo Nan didn't know whether Go Ye's words were compliments or insults. He would just treat it as a compliment for the time being. At this moment, Liang Lu had already completed the rapid repair of the ovipositor B's comprehensive repair station. Usually, at this stage, the artificial intelligence would quickly assign new tasks and would never let a workstation be idle for too long. But wasn't Go Ye here? He issued an order at the right time. Liang Lu and Luo Nan's virtual world, as well as the isolation barrier, displayed a pause icon. The two rookies turned their heads, confused as to what Go Ye was going to do. Go Ye's round face was full of smiles, and he didn't look like an officer at all. If he still had his prosthetics, he would probably be smiling and stroking the two dogs' heads to show his love. You've been working for 2 consecutive days without making any obvious mistakes. Very good. However, I can't be arrogant and complacent. I still need to recharge myself in time. It's time to study now. Learn what? Captain, are you going to give us some pointers? Luo Nan's train of thought was simple, but Liang Lu's thought was a layer deeper. Though he had irresponsibly thrown Go Ye to Luo Nan to deal with, this didn't mean that he didn't respect Go Ye. On the contrary, if this experienced maintenance veteran, who was praised by even a colonel, was willing to guide them, he would definitely be more than happy to do so. However, Go Ye chuckled and shook his head in denial. You've been working so hard without sleep and rest. The level of your studies can definitely be raised a little more. This is the training video for the promotion of colonels. Promoted to a major. Training? Aha, an analysis of the current situation and the direction of the logistics work in the near future. Liang Lu was startled when he heard that. Then he came to his senses. His pretty face was filled with excitement. It's our turn? You mean the Jade Crystal Formation? Go Ye glanced at him. Don't make wild guesses. Won't you know when you learn? Understood. Liang Lu's voice was loud and clear, no matter what Go Ye said. In other words, he had a 99% certainty. Actually, Liang Lu, Zhang Xiao, and Lu Andy, these professionals with considerable attainments in the field of configuration knowledge, had already guessed the core of this unforeseen event when the two knights and Colonel Shengzhan arrived at the scene of the contamination. All of the reactions done by the relay station were related to this core, whether overt or covert. In fact, mid-level officers like Zhang Xiao had already participated in the relevant training. The decision-makers of the relay station didn't have any intentions of deliberately hiding the crisis. However, this matter was quite specialized. Not everyone could understand it smoothly. Plus, it was wartime right now. Every soldier in the relay station had a mission. It was impossible for them to all go off-post for training. They could only take turns. And Colonel Shang Zhan was a famous busy man. In the end, he could only use this sort of compromise method. From top to bottom, from key departments to peripheral positions, from directly related personnel to unrelated personnel. They were trained in sequence. Rookies like Luo Nan and Liang Lu were able to get their turn at this stage mainly by relying on the position bonuses of the maintenance personnel of the logistics department. Go Yi saw that Liang Lu and Luo Nan weren't ignorant people, so he didn't feel like saying anything more. He indicated to them that they could go. Liang Lu didn't say anything further as he began to organize the workstations. He even indicated to Luo Nan to keep up with the pace and not waste time. Luo Nan obviously listened to his commanding officer. However, the true commanding officer changed his mind at the last moment just as he took off his soundproof earmuffs. Hold on. Since you guys are in this state, then you might as well take turns. You guys can rest, but you can't. That's pretty good. Ha! Liang Lu and Luo Nan were startled at first, then delighted. Go Ye's words were clearly correcting his earlier arrangement of having the two of them squeeze into the same workstation. It was tantamount to recognizing their ability to work independently. Yes, Lieutenant. Liang Lu and Luo Nan spoke at the same time. Liang Lu even clenched his fists in secret, cheering for the sake of quickly justifying himself. Liang Lu had Luo Nan go listen to the lecture first. He was quite interested in Colonel Shang Zhan's training course. Luo Nan was very interested in Colonel Shang Zhan's training course, but he really didn't want to move right now. He shook his head and said, I feel pretty good during this period of time. I'll stay a bit longer. Call me later. The emotional state of a technician was the one that was completely unreasonable. Liang Lu knew how much Luo Nan cared before. It didn't seem like Luo Nan was simply giving way out of courtesy. He thought for a bit and didn't press the issue any further. Then I'll make some notes first. You can refer to them later. Okay. The two reached an agreement. Liang Lu jumped up and saluted Go Yi. He hurried out of the workstation and rushed to the training room. The pause icon of the isolation cover disappeared at nearly the same time. A new round of tasks had arrived. The advantage of the two workstations was completely lost as soon as Liang Lu left. A single workstation had to repair 1,500 pieces of equipment within 30 hours. Such a flow rate was no longer able to allow Luo Nan to calmly split and reconstruct. He quickly entered a working state to deal with the equipment queues that flowed over one after another. The vast majority of maintenance tasks at the lower workstations were those that were hard to handle with the automatic maintenance process, but they were relatively low-end problems. Luo Nan didn't need to use too much of his brain. He just needed to make accurate judgments, choose the appropriate materials, and act fast. It was because of this that Luo Nan would subconsciously use the syncopator to cut the more special equipment problems the moment he bumped into them during such a busy time. Luo Nan might not have the time to ponder deeply, but he would always encounter similar situations no matter how special this sort of large flow and highly repetitive task flow was. He couldn't see through it the first time. He couldn't see through it the second time. He couldn't see through it the third or fifth time. He wouldn't miss it. Whenever there was a gap of a dozen or 20 seconds between two maintenance tasks, Luo Nan would quickly organize and record these small gains. Through this method, Luo Nan quickly absorbed the mature and complete configuration design results of the Heavenly Yuan Empire. He endlessly enriched his own knowledge base. He didn't feel bored at all. He just enjoyed it. The feeling is really good. Your foundation is quite solid. Your condition is even rarer. For the 100-year sequence to produce such a talent, the Department of Science and Education should treat you as a model. They should be bragging about you. Luo Nan's heartbeat sped up in an instant from the soundproof earmuffs. Only now did he realize that Go Yi hadn't left yet. He had been observing from behind all this time. Speaking of which, This could already be considered interfering with his work. Lieutenant Go Yi didn't seem to be aware of this. He continued to evaluate Luo Nan. Your hobbies are out of the ordinary. Many people know that the syncopator is useful, but it's rare to see someone use it as frequently as you do. However, there's something I don't quite understand.
If you trained in this solid foundation in the general knowledge course of the 100-year sequence, then even if you've never come into contact with military equipment before, there should be quite a high rate of mechanical configuration designs in related civilian products.
Is there a need to carry treasures back to your home, to take notes one by one, to proofread them all over again? Luo Nan's hands didn't stop working, but his mind was a bit muddled. He didn't know how to respond. Was he supposed to say that he had gone through the most basic of learning and practice in a sandstorm filled with space-time configuration fragments? At the same time, he relied purely on self-study. He hadn't received any formal foundational education in configuration? Speaking of which, what in the world was the Innerverse simulator doing? How could it allow a gamer to fall into such an awkward and sensitive situation? Lieutenant Go Yi blew on the syncopator while Luo Nan was crazily ridiculing in his mind. The syncopator, which Luo Nan had been controlling, suddenly deviated from its original trajectory. It spun and spun on the control panel. Or is it that you didn't learn mechanical configuration design in school? You walked the path of bionics or genetic layouts? Actually, I studied space-time design. Luo Nan thought about these words, but he didn't say them. In the end, he could only respond vaguely, I just learned blindly. And at this time he shouted loudly in his mind, hurry up and show yourself, simulator of the Innerverse. He didn't know if the simulator had shown itself, but Lieutenant Go Yi really did laugh at this moment. All right. That's a possibility.
However, speaking of the syncopator, this little thing is a mechanical creation, but the source isn't that solid.
The credit of the School of Fantasy is a bit bigger. It said that it's an accessory to the School of Fantasy's research on the alien species. The School of Fantasy? Luo Nan wasn't too clear on this concept, but it wasn't good for him to ask. He just listened to Go Yi speak. The syncopator is very different from the School of Creation in their hands. It's gaudy, but it's especially capable. It can even simulate a senior lord-level alien species and a fantasy species. Later on, they had to simulate the nefarious poison revolution. In the end, they flipped many times, suffering disastrous casualties. The golden age of the mental side has already passed. The domain of configuration doesn't have a solid material foundation. It's far too easy for problems to arise. The School of Fantasy has declined because of this. Legend has it that the perpetual configurations that are active in the depths of the Sky Abyss Spirit Network, capable of imprisoning and taming fantasy breeds, have been annihilated one by one. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.